The Visualcast is a hybrid podcast where we sit down with some of the best, most interesting, and most exciting visual artists from all over the world. We chat about life, art, visuals, software, hardware, systems, crystals, alien downloads, spirituality, and catalysts. It's essentially a massive nerd out. But the guests also do a set where we dive into their computer and get an up-and-close look at how they make art, how they perform art, or really anything they want to share with us. I really hope you guys enjoy this episode. To support us, please like and subscribe, follow us on Instagram, and leave us a review on Spotify. Now, without any further ado, here's the Visualcast.
The world is like a ride at an amusement park, and it's fun for a while. Some people have been on the ride for a long time, and they begin to question, is this real, or is this just a ride? And other people have remembered, and they come back to us, and they say, hey, don't worry, don't be afraid, ever, because this is just a ride.
Special, and I always say that this one's different, but I must say this time I mean it even more. Very unique guest today, very high level visual artist, a very I should say important figure in the TouchDesigner scene, and just somebody who I personally have learned from a lot, and I'm very excited to have on the cast today. Welcome PolyHop, Simon Alexander Adams.
Hey. What's up? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on. It's you're a very busy guy, so I really appreciate you taking the time to make it out.
Yeah, for sure. I try to keep it balanced though as much as I can. So with we could talk later about work-life balance certainly, but
we will.
It's important to keep your weekends.
Okay, so I like to start off with like a little bit of a scripted question, and then we'll get more into a conversation. PolyHop, Simon, having learned so much from you over the years, to put a face to the voice is exciting to say the least. Your original claim to fame is doing generative dailies for over 6 years, which is not only impressive, but extremely inspiring, and shows the power and uniqueness of TouchDesigner and visual artists in general. Besides for creating immersive and interactive installations all over the world, you have been working at the powerhouse ArtTech house for quite some time, creating mind-blowing visual experiences at the highest level. Your exceptional ability to express complex ideas and techniques in an understandable and digestible format is absolutely amazing and of huge importance to the TouchDesigner community. So, to start things off, what is generative art, and how does it speak to you as a form of expression?
Ooh, okay, yeah, let's get into definitions right away. Yeah, I think of, generative art, it's existed like before computers, right? So it's really just like artwork that uses some autonomous means in its creation. It takes the artist a little bit out of the equation. So it could be as simple as like flipping a coin and determining what color you draw a box, right? It's adding some degree of randomness, but you as the artist are creating the structure for the work to exist. And there's a lot of different degrees of how much you relinquish control as the artist. But I think of like, generative art, I think when I was studying art in general, was always really interesting, and even just like looking at John Cage and his approach to using randomness in music, for instance, is like a really interesting example. Certainly with computers, you can generate now, used to be you'd have like John Cage would go and get lists of random numbers from IBM. You don't have to do that anymore. Like you can generate pseudo-random numbers on your computer easily, right? So I think with like generative art and specifically like digital generative art and TouchDesigner, it's kind of the perfect platform for using code, using like TouchDesigner as a visual programming language, and additionally things like GLSL and Python. All of those combined are perfect for doing generative art. Lots of other platforms, of course, too. But essentially like I like also the term, like, I think I'm blanking on the I could pull up the example, but like shepherding randomness is another term I
Mm,
like.
mm,
That idea that you are taking something that is
mm.
kind of random and like
Guiding it.
finding a way to, yeah, you guide it into an output, into a form, and then the
Hmm.
result is this system that can surprise you, right? I mean, once you've done enough of it, you're surprised less often. But I
Right.
think like I'm really interested in creating systems that spark my own like create like excite
Pique
me,
your
right?
interest.
They, yeah, my interest, or yeah, like I think surprise is the right word. It's why I've been attracted to like complex systems as well as kind of like in those sorts of simulations as ways of generating inputs, is because you get to these things where you're like, wow, I didn't expect that to happen. And when you're working in with code, which is determinist at its core, it's cool when you find things that you don't expect. Like
Right.
that's kind of like the fuel for creativity for me. It's like, wow, okay, this is cool, this is new. I like where, like, how can I channel this into um, something different that excites me. So I kind of got off track, but that's like
You did
generative
not.
art in a nutshell.
That was amazing. Yeah, I love your flip the coin reference. Like that's like so it's so simplistic, but also like so telling of what generative art is, right? It's like this kind of like you're the one flipping the coin where it's gonna land. There's you know obviously like reality is gonna or objective like physics are gonna like spin it and it's gonna land and the wind and the way it lands and all these things are gonna determine how it lands, right? But it's like who knows how it's gonna land. And it's kind of like when you play with the seed or the period of a noise, you're kind of like flipping the coin and it's gonna land somewhere, it's gonna reach somewhere, but it's
Hmm.
infinite different types of possibilities of how that's gonna land. And I just love that. I love, to me, like generative art, the thing that I love about it is like the aliveness of it. It's like it's more than just like it's not a simulation per se, but it in a way kind of is simulating something, right? The pattern of a noise is like a math equation that's kind of expressing something, and to me that's kind of like alive. It's taking like nature and bringing it into like code in some way. um, I just love that about it.
Totally. Yeah. Um, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we're gonna definitely jump more into what that means and kind of generative art in general. Um, I'd love to kind of just quickly. This is something that I've been trying to do more and more of, is show people's art a little bit at the
Hmm.
beginning to kind of show their kind of like uniqueness and their take on things. And I mean, it's kind of apropos to our conversation of generative art. My recent favorite of yours has been these quantized,
Oh yeah.
reaction diffusion. I just, I just can't get enough of it because it's Let me zoom out here a little bit. It's just so like there's just something so beautiful about it. As somebody who is, I mean, I love reaction diffusion, definitely one of my go-tos for visuals, but the way that you're kind of getting these like intricate patterns, but at the same time breaking those kind of what I'm used to seeing in reaction diffusion in such like a really crazy way, it's so cool. I really love it.
Yeah, thanks. Those have been fun. I've been trying to like, I like to do different things,
It's crazy.
for my sketches, but I get stuck on ideas that like I'm like, I just want to do more of that. And then I'm like,
Yeah.
I guess that's okay. Getting past the oh, I got to make a different thing every day. It's like, well, I can just roll on something for a while that I'm like enjoying, because people will probably enjoy it too.
I mean,
Yeah, so those
you're
were, yeah.
you're kind of you're real, and I don't, obviously you have a lot of things you're famous for, but you're real kind of like breaking into this market and having such a unique name is these dailies that you really did for so long. Like, I don't know how much you have on your Instagram, but look, like 2,200 posts, 2,500 posts. Like
Yeah,
that's
if
just
you,
like
I think if you
it's
click the
crazy.
newest one, it'll like the number. I typically have like a number on it that's just like I try to increment every day,
Uh huh.
which is pretty close. Like that one's
Here,
two
2,337.
three three seven,
Yeah.
right? I definitely make mistakes with that. Like I've done. It's been a while since I've done an audit, so to speak. But like I'll sometimes do like, okay, here's the, and then I'll be like, oh, I used the same number these 2 days, or I skipped 10 by accident. You know, like I'll find those errors because I'm just a human typing like copy pasting every day.
For sure.
So at least I know I like have done them one per day. You know, I know that that's been consistent, but it's like the number actually might be wrong. is how it goes. Yeah,
I definitely want to talk more about the dailies because it's like such a unique thing, and you know, I'm finding more and more people use it as a tool to like force themselves to be creative, or like maybe force themselves to, you know, especially when your vocation becomes your job, you know, it's like becomes like a little bit, you can get like a little bit burnt out maybe, or you know, you find yourself in like a position of like, oh, my job is sucking all my creative energy and I'm not liking my output anymore. And I think dailies is such a great way, not that I've ever done it myself, so I'm speaking out of other people's experience, but I think it's a great way to kind of refuel that or restructure that for yourself. And it's just a fascinating kind of take on art, you know, it's especially when it's generative, like, you know, like imagine if each of your dailies was like running the whole time. You know what I mean? Like, that'd be crazy.
I mean, it could be.
That'd be wild.
Like that'd be a cool thing to do.
Cool.
But there's a lot of them. A lot of GPU power would be required for that. I don't want to think about how that would. Cloud. Yeah, no, the dailies thing. And I think, you know, I first started doing. I don't know if we want to talk about it now. We can.
We can talk about it now for sure.
Yeah. I mean, like the reason I started doing it originally. Well, there's one is like I came across Zach Lieberman's writing about daily sketches, and that was like I was like, oh yeah, seems like a really good reason to do it. And I was familiar with Beeple too. I think I mean, you know,
he made it the most famous, probably.
Yeah, he kind of was like the first person I encountered doing that, but it was really Zach's writing about it that pushed me to do it. And but also I think like at the time I was out of school, I was like trying to self-produce little like interactive installations, and I was teaching, but not teaching TouchDesigner, not teaching things that I was really wanting to do, but things that I could teach, right? And so I was like, okay, I need to like level up this, but I'm not doing it enough, you know? Like, so I really used it as like an excuse to do something in TouchDesigner every day, right? And I think and what I liked about it was the sharing of it like helped hold me accountable, like in some ways. Like I was like, it's the process of sharing it that like, yeah, there's going to be a public record, and I kind of like that, you know, that like I don't really care like who, like the whole following thing was interesting because it was completely organic. It was just like through the virtue of doing it every day, people followed me, and I also found work, right? And I was like, oh yeah, I guess that's also something that can happen, but it's not the point, and it has never been the point of the dailies. And I've even had conversations with people who they're like you know, like, oh, like talking about it as if like, oh yeah, the following is the point. And I was like, well, no, it's not for me. Like, and that actually is not, I mean, it's success to some, but like to me, success isn't defined by that. Right. As well. Like, it's like more about my own tracking myself against myself through time. Right. Like, for sure. Kind of.
I mean, the follower number is pretty much facade-ish, you know, definitely can help you. Definitely can help you reach more people, but it's, I mean, if that's your goal as an artist, that's going to be a pretty, you're not going to...
It's a hollow thing. It's a shallow and hollow thing, right?
I mean, we shouldn't judge, right? We shouldn't judge. Like, there is like a way to do it right, but, you know, if you're actively trying to get followers, then you're probably not being true to your expression, right? If it's the other way around, like you're being true to your expression and that's getting you a lot of followers, by all means, that's
doing
great.
That's doing it right in my book, because it's like, I think and I do think this too, like remaining authentic to your work is so important. And I mean, there's examples of this in other media too that I see, but I think like sometimes like not really paying attention to what's happening is like a secret power. Like I think like sometimes I just like don't try to. I mean, I do follow a lot of what other people are doing, and I like to play with things, and I'm inspired by things all the time. But there's also something to be said for like just kind of like trying to find inspiration outside of say the like the discourse. I think like this is not a TouchDesigner example, but like the video game Bellatra that came out, which is like a roguelike like poker game, which is
Okay.
amazing.
Haven't heard of
It's like a deck builder applied to like a normal deck of cards, and
Cool.
you get jokers that totally manipulate
The game.
the rules of poker to the point that like you're scoring. This is just a crazy game. It's amazing and crazy.
Bellatra, I
And
gotta check it out.
the creator of it did not follow. I've read that he did not follow like all of the existing card builder, like deck builders, like even something like Slay the Spire, which is a like big
Classic.
deck builder roguelike. It's like he's like, yeah, I looked at it at the end, but just for like UI reference. He just like wanted to figure out, oh, how did they port this to like a game controller, right? Like, so he actually was kind of like not paying attention to it, and it's why I think it's like it made pretty big waves as like the freshest deck builder since Slay the Spire, because like he maybe because he was drawing inspiration from everywhere else, right? So I think of that as like an anecdote, but I also think it's important to like kind of have your eye on both sides of it. I don't know.
I love that. And I definitely want to talk in the second portion about where you draw your inspiration from. Before we get there, I'd love to kind of go back to Little Simon.
Sure.
You grew up in New York State and Minnesota, and among other places, you kind of were a little bit hesitant about where you grew up because it seems like you grew up in a lot of places. But
just before that was Madison, so it's like not that many. It's like
okay.
3.
Tell us a little bit about your life growing up, and I would love to hear kind of this is also jumping the gun a little bit, but you went and studied music and performing arts technology in Michigan, eventually getting your master's there. I'd love to know kind of like, was there any inspiration from a young age in your childhood from parents, family members, friends that kind of made you want to go into that area of studying, or just in general, why did you find yourself there? Like, where's the origin of this, mad scientist, visual artist?
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, well, where to start? I mean,
Wherever you want.
yeah, I think like if you look at like, well, first you did mention parents, and I think that it's important to acknowledge that like my parents both, like my mom is a composer and writes music, and my dad
Well,
is
there you go.
and she has a PhD in composition, and my dad has a PhD in computer science. So it's like, okay, you can
Shit.
see where that came into my life, right?
sure.
Is that I had access to a grand piano growing up because that's what my mom used to compose, and I had access to computers, like we had a Linux box, I had like a Windows 3.1 box that I was able to like poke at with MS-DOS, and my dad was like, "This is what a variable is." When I was like, in middle school, elementary school, and I was like, "Oh, it's a box you put stuff in and you can get it out later." I'm like, okay, I kind of get that, right? Like I thought of it as a cubby or something, but
awesome.
it makes sense later. Oh yeah, like the word subroutine existed in my mind before middle school, right? Okay, well, there's something like there, right? But anyway, I the visual thing also was very much me. Like I was interested in I liked drawing a lot. I did a lot of pen and ink drawing. I liked as soon as I could, I like got, I played with Kid Pix as a kid, right? But then eventually like got Adobe CS3 so I could do Photoshop and Illustrator and like learn make art on the computer. I went and downloaded Reaper so that I could make like sample collages and breakcore on my it's like all of that stuff in high school on top of like playing music. I studied classical, but I also improvised and composed music, and I did play like cello and upright bass and was in a rock band and all. Like I just kind of liked doing creative things with my time. Even with like I've always loved games, but I spent a lot of time with this game N, which was like a browser-based game that Flash game platformer, but as soon as I found that there was a level editor, I just like went ham on that. I just like
Nice.
made thousands of levels, maybe 1,000 levels for that, and was very involved in like the level editing community. And I think the as like learning that like I could design something that was both functional and aesthetically compelling was something I learned from that community. It was like, oh, people are using this minimalist set of objects to create really cool looking levels that not only like feel good to play, but also like kind of have their own look to them. And so I think there's a lot of, a lot to be said for that as well as an influence on just my design and UI, like in UX kind of thoughts, like making things, sending them out, getting feedback from people playing them.
I didn't know there was a level editor.
Oh yeah, you hit tilde and it pops up and you're like, whoa.
No way.
And then you could do, I loved like making puzzles, and I also loved like editing it to glitch it out and using glitches as part of the gameplay mechanic. I used to do that a lot.
So you would glitch out the actual game itself? Like just through
you could
like HTML or whatever?
Well, no, the game was
Flash,
represented as tiles. There was like a tile set, and so you would have like a character that represents a certain tile, and then oh yeah, it's funny that we're bringing this up. And then you have objects that have like a location and ID, and you could say like those like those little like trampolines. You could change them so that they launched you to a different location by using like trigonometry, and then because it's like you'd update a frame and then you'd place another one where you landed, it would reset your speed, and you could create like teleporters. So you could do like crazy stuff by editing it and so I really liked really poking it behind the scenes. And it's like, I mean, I think that I'm not really in the modding communities because I don't have time for that, but like I feel like there's a lot of like cultural like folks who just like dig into sort of those games, like I don't know, Skyrim or something, and just
totally,
or Morrowind, and make just like deep into those
crazy
making new things out of it. Yeah.
Totally.
So yeah. Anyway, I think that was also kind of an influence. But then but yeah, and then the visual art thing, I was kind of talking about that. Like that was really one thing that like neither of my parents did. So I think in some ways I drew a lot of influence from their paths and like the things that they loved, but also really do my own thing with it in a way. Not to say that it's like, not cool to do what your parents do, but there's a degree of people being like, oh yeah, you it makes sense. And I'm like, yeah, it does totally make sense why I had access to those things that became passions. And I think that's really important. Like, also for people growing up is to have exposure to those different things. Cause, I think I was also really, fortunate to not have like my parents also just like didn't push me to do them. They weren't like there wasn't really pressure to do a specific thing. So I was really glad that like if I decided to stop playing piano or something, my mom might have been like, oh okay, like
right,
not
a little
happy,
bit
but
disappointed maybe, but not like
right
in your face.
Yeah, so I do think that degree of like letting me pursue what I was interested in and like not really, worrying about it too much. I was a good student too, so it helped that I just like I could have gone into engineering or something too, right? I was just like a lot of different directions that I was going. But yeah, I kind of kept it open, and then I think this is also interesting. I think is that I, for a long time, was like set on going to school for music composition because I'd written like an orchestra piece and music for like local chamber ensembles like in the Twin Cities.
Wow.
And
Awesome.
I was like, okay, I want to like do this. And everywhere I applied, except for University of Michigan, actually was just like a standard like composition degree, which was kind of crazy now to think about if I'd gone down that path, which is not the right path for me, I think, or like I would have found my way certainly. But I was like, well, I'm also interested in like visual art, and I like technology, and I like making like, I kind of want to do some, and I like making electronic music that's kind of weird and not necessarily like academic. And so, so I think like choosing to go to say, University of Michigan's Performing Arts Technology program that was like interdisciplinary and like they non-idiomatic, they weren't like, you have to write this kind of music, you have to record this kind of music, was really awesome. And
That's
then
awesome.
beyond that, it led to things like interactive media design classes where I was working with Arduinos and microcontrollers and like doing interactive installations, building new instruments for musical expression using sensors. Like,
Wow.
I had a sort of mentor there, Carlos Garcia, who now is in the games industry, but he was in the forums as well as like LO5, and I know has had some like TouchDesigner developer and artist, and as someone local who was like always sort of steps ahead, he was the one who looked at say Eamon Tobin's ISAM and was like, what is this? A lot of people did, right? I
Yeah,
that was also a big show
of
for
course.
me
Huge
and
inspiration.
big, yeah, and so like kind of leading, like he was always sort of ahead of me in that game, and so it was really cool to have a person who could kind of, could like he kind of hipped me to TouchDesigner in the first place when I was in
Nice.
school, and then I was like, oh, I'm just gonna use this for every project that I can, basically, so that I
Yeah.
can get myself to use it. So no one there in the faculty knew how to use it, right? No one did, but it was the kind of program where it was all project based, and so they didn't care what
Doesn't
tools I
matter.
used because it's about solving the design problems that you set for yourself with the tools that make sense.
Yeah.
Or if it's an art piece, like letting the concept drive the tools, which I also think is a really important thing that I learned there. Like I think that approach to design and art making is I think really strong.
For sure.
So anyway, I think that kind of gets through it. A lot of it, that leads through my schooling, maybe basically. I mean,
No, it's awesome. I love hearing like the early backgrounds, the early inspirations. Having your parents be kind of in that field is very telling in a way, and it's really interesting to hear that they didn't force you into it, but you kind of wanted to do it anyways, which is like it's almost a testament to your parents being good parents. Is something that I always think about as a parent, like because my parents weren't they were great parents. I love my parents, but they it's a classic thing as a kid. You want to kind of go against your parents. You don't want to do what they do because what they do is lame and blah blah blah. And like I always wonder with my kid, like what is the right amount to like be like, oh, look what daddy does, and then also like what do you want to do, to like make sure that he doesn't
yeah.
turn his head away from it. Like if he becomes a jock, I'll be very upset. I'm just joking.
That's funny. It's a good joke.
But yeah, it's always just very interesting, like how people find their way in places. So when you were in school, did you learn like programming, or was that something that you kind of picked up on your own? I mean, I guess your dad kind
Yeah.
of gave you a little bit of a base, but
I mean, kind of, but like, it's not like I was actually coding it really. Like the most that I got to in high school was like, oh, I've got to flash if else statements. It was like really basic, or like some HTML kind of
right, some
like build a
expressions
website
or
kind of
something like
stuff.
that.
Yeah, I mean, nothing really complex. I think in college I actually kind of wish that I did more. Like there was a programming requirement. So I mean, I would say like I did learn how to code in college, and like I think the interactive oh my god, yeah, interaction design courses, the interactive media like stuff where I was like cutting my teeth on Arduino and for the first time and writing like I think that this is funny, but my first Arduino project assignment was to make a game of Simon, which is funny. That game, right? I was
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like, that's what it
clickable.
was. It's always been the assignment,
That's
but
funny.
that was
Simon
just a cool
Says.
one where you have to, you know, get the like the buttons and the LEDs inputs and then program the game logic. And I really like, kind of
That's
ran
cool.
with it from there. So, so yeah, from there it was like I also did a little bit of like I did like a self-directed open frameworks semester where I just learned some open frameworks. So like,
Nice.
and followed a online sort of C++ thing. So I didn't actually take like a formal class though, which I kind of wish I did, because there's some, I mean, there's always holes, but I'm definitely not, I don't think that like my background is as like programmer heavy. It's like I really have like an arts background and a music background and a design background. But like I kind of, at this point now I've like taught myself a lot of it, as one does.
I mean, your school sounds awesome. It's like kind of the like really what you want to get out of like an art school or out of a university of like, here's a bunch of different things that kind of are gonna, you know, interest you or pique your interest in different places. What is the school called? Just to give it a shout out. Michigan.
It's University of Michigan. It's in Ann
University of
Arbor.
Michigan.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
so
it's
like a state
specifically in
university.
the school. Yeah, it's in the School of Music, Theater, and Dance there, and it's a great music school, I think. And then the Performing Arts Technology program is where I went, and so you know, definitely pretty like audio focused in terms of like what you're doing, but you can also like I definitely took it in a more visual approach than a lot of my classmates, and you definitely have like, you know, peers there who are doing everything from like recording and production to like, you know, I have friends there who like, you know, or know people. I wouldn't say I'm good friends with them like don't talk to them anymore, but like I knew people who are now in like Wolfpack, you know, like people will go do really wide ranges of things.
Yeah.
Like Kelly Moran did that program, who's now on like Warp Records, you know, so like there's all sorts of people who go to do amazing and high profile stuff all over the place.
That's awesome.
A lot of people, you know, you get people who are just straight up like recording engineers, people who go do audio engineering for places like Bose or other kind of companies like that.
Very unique kind of
yeah.
like school, huh? Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's super cool because there's really like there's the engineering department at U of M, so like there's a track that where you're taking, you know, all the way through Calc 4 is required, right, or something, like you have to go do the engineering and the math. I didn't do that, so also another regret is like I'm like, yeah, man, I lost all my math skills in college and I had to get them back, kind of thing. Like I'm still feeling like rusty, you know, all the time.
What's math? I don't even know what that is.
I know, yeah.
So I want to move on to your current place, but just one question before. Was it very obvious to you to go to university? Like, was it kind of like, you know, were you like, okay, I want to be a musician, I want to be an artist, I want to do this, I'm going to go study it? Or was it like your parents being kind of PhD, you know, very high level academics, was it almost like required of you or like, you know, necessity?
It wasn't required, but I think like
Required is not the right word.
It was just like, I mean, there was definitely, I don't know, I didn't really question it too much, I guess. Like for me, I liked school, so it wasn't really a problem. Like
Nerd
I was just
alert.
like, oh yeah, exactly. No, I was like, I'm absolutely a nerd, right? So, like, you know, I was like doing advanced, like speaking of math, I was like in the most advanced math at my school. Like there are definitely students I knew who like were going to college but I wasn't there, but like, you know, I still was I did like the equivalent of Calc 2 in my high school. So it was like, okay, I like doing this. I can work the sort of system a little bit in the sense that like when I came to college, it's like, you know, I was good at finding things and assignments that I could enjoy too, which I think is important.
For sure.
Thinking about projects as like, and assignments as like a scaffolding that you can kind of fit your own perspective and ideas onto, which is also what I think most teachers, any good teacher in my book, if your student runs with it at all, that's like a success, right? And you want them to sort of find their own perspective in it and do something that you're like, cool, I didn't think you'd do that, but I'm glad you found like a response to this assignment that is noteworthy and unique and like encapsulates your own perspective. And that was always my approach, and I always did great because people were like, oh yeah, you ran with this and put more energy into it than other people, because I just usually can find something I'm interested. I'm just interested in a lot of shit. So sorry, a lot of stuff. I don't know.
You can curse. It's all good.
Great. I figured we're adults here. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we can definitely curse on this podcast. Interesting. I love that. I felt like that was kind of like an anecdote that you would have some insight into, because it's like school is like one of those things, especially in the arts world, of like, do I need to go to school? Is it a waste of my time? Am I going to get anything out of it? And I think that there's really no right answer. But somebody like yourself who's interested in a lot of shit, maybe that is a good place for them to go, because it's like, here's a lot of doors that you can kind of go through. Maybe, you know, you go through a door and you don't look back, you know, and that's like a really good thing at the end of the day. For myself, it was kind of similar. Like I knew I wanted to be an artist. I knew I wanted to be like a filmmaker, really. I went to film school, but because I went to film school, I was introduced to so many different kind of aspects like philosophy and, different histories of films and stuff like that, and video art, which is where I kind of ended up. And I think if I wouldn't have gone to, I don't know, who knows what, if, whatever.
Yeah.
But
Right.
I think that the ability to kind of see a lot of different things made me realize that, okay, I don't have to be a filmmaker to fulfill my dream of becoming an artist. I can use what I learn't in film throughout the years and use it in a different place, which I think is something that's sometimes hard to figure out on your own if you're not introduced to so many different things at once. You get very insular, you get very focused. You're like, I'm going to be this, I'm going to do this. And there's really, I'm learning it in my life again and again and again. There's never one way to do something. And there's no correct path. It's really just like what feels good to you. Are you expressing yourself in the way that you want? And, for me, it was like, how do I solve problems creatively? That's my excitement, is like solving problems, not necessarily making art or something like that. It's like, how do I solve problems? Is it through, in art, I can do that as well. But that's like kind of was a much later realization in my life. So now you're living in Detroit. You're working for a super high-end company called ArtTech House. I guess it's a creative studio. For those who don't know.
Oh yeah, they have venues and also I'm in their studio department, but yeah.
Right, because they also have actual physical spaces, but they're also a like a studio, design studio. Just gonna kind of show the website, but please tell us a little bit about your role there. What it's like living in Detroit, and take it wherever you want.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I've been there for almost 5 years now, which is wild. But I do interactive multimedia development there and design and however you want to call it. I do a lot of the TouchDesigner work. It's a pretty small studio, so it's I kind of get to do things like a lot more things than you might on like a big team. Like it's like concepts all the way and UI UX and like thinking about and actually developing it and designing it and going through iterations. So and then actually deploying it, like all of that. I'm just like there for all of that. But we have a team that can help with a lot of like the spatial aspects, the hardware, the projection studies. So it is also nice that I at this point do sort of reside mostly in like software, which is not to say I don't like the hardware side, but I think my specialty at this point really is like making kind of like the generative and like the visual side of things in TouchDesigner, like making these interactive works. So that's I think we've worked on a few projects I really found rewarding. To name, like we did one of the earlier pieces was Life of a Neuron, which was like a collaboration with Society for Neuroscience. I really enjoyed like we have these collaborations that we do where we work with scientists to and like the Twilight Zone. That was a recent one with WHOI, Woods Hole Oceanic Institute, where again we're like talking with scientists to create work that kind of like tries to express something from a scientific area of study, but also is art at the same time. So it's finding that sort of expressive output that kind of is meant to also create an emotional response, so to speak, but still be kind of scientifically accurate as much as possible. Obviously, there's some kind of middle. It's always hard. Like the Beyond the Light, which was like working with NASA. Those are the three that we've done that I've been a part of, and really rewarding, but probably like the hardest projects in my book, because it's very different when, say, we do like when I'm working on a cherry blossom festival piece for DC. It's like, well, yeah, it's got to look like it's like aesthetic, really at the core. It's like about celebrating cherry blossoms, right? And like, how do we do that in a way that's different each year, which is its own challenge. But the sort of working with scientists, it's like, you get data and you're like, how do I like do something meaningful with this? How do I show this in a way that's like compelling, but not distorting the meaning of it, right? So that was, I think some of the projects that I found to be really exciting there.
Yeah, visualizing data is such an interesting concept, like I think it's something that's really taken not flight, but it's become more and more interesting, over the years, like just the way the lots of different ways to do it, with like, different tools and kind of stuff. And also like what the end result looks like, I think it's a very interesting thing. And it's something that like, kind of marries, or not marries, but it's kind of something that is got its stronghold or foot in, commercial, scientific world, corporate world. It's like a very kind of like multifaceted thing. Super cool. Yeah, I mean, I want to also in the second segment get into like what it means to work for like a big company and a big studio. Even though you said it's a small studio, there's still, I would mean, there's still a big studio in terms of the clients they have and the work that they do. I was very lucky to go to ArtTech House in New York in like must have been like very close to when they opened, like maybe 2015,
Which,
or is that too early?
They opened
in New York, the one in New York.
2020. I think it was. Like
it must have been before then.
Pandemic.
No, it must have been before then. It must have been before then. It was like
20. Okay.
Yeah, the one in New York, like the no, I think it was like 2016, 2017. I want to say. Is that?
Well, that's like around when DC's like. I mean, the lineage of it is not that long, but anyway, which exhibit did you see though?
It was Rafik. It was a Rafik and Andal.
Oh, yeah, it was the first
exhibit.
One, yeah.
It was like really right when they just opened. It was like when I lived in New York.
2021. Though Machine Hallucinations was 2021. It was like post-pandemic. Really? Yeah. But as I was gonna say, that was like.
No way, that can't be. I'm now so. I'm like now I'm like, how does my memory work?
I might be wrong though. That was just the date that I saw here.
No, I could have sworn it was like really earlier. I have to now find this.
Oh, we'll find it. Yeah.
New York opening. But yeah, it was super cool. It was really cool, and I really enjoyed. Okay, it opened in 2019. New York City.
Oh yeah, New York did. Yeah. But like I think. Oh, okay, you're right. It was 2019. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was. Things, but I thought it was earlier. Man, my
it was like
so
right around that time though, because I started right in 2019, and that's around when that came.
I remember like it was just like it was very new. It was clearly like they were still figuring things out there. But I was really impressed. It was super immersive, and I was already very into projection mapping and kind of like that whole kind of like idea of immersive things. And I kind of have knew Rafik and Andal just from the internet and kind of being viral, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. And it seemed like the ethos of the company or of the studio was very like centric, like focused on the art and focused on like the immersion, and I really was very impressed by it. So it must be super cool to work there, and I would love to talk a little bit more about that in our second segment. Just kind of skipping a little bit ahead and going a little bit back at the same time, you kind of mentioned that you found TouchDesigner through your teacher in university, through I can't remember his name.
More of a mentor, Carlos.
Carlos.
Garcia. He was not
Carlos
my
Garcia.
Teacher, but sort of
a mentor that you had for sure. And it's really awesome that he gave us PolyHop. So thank you, Carlos Garcia. We kind of spoke about dailies and kind of what it meant for you. What I would like to just touch on a little bit before we jump into your set here, because we're about to get there. How do you juggle, this full-time job and freelance work and being a person, having a partner, and just living with this kind of like daily concept? And then also, like, do you have a methodology for it? Like, do you have like a quick and easy way to export things? Do you have a quick and easy way to generate text for it? Like, what is your kind of ethos and methodology behind it? That's a hard word.
All right, yeah. First step is like the balance step, which I mean, like, is easier sometimes than others, right? It really depends on what's going on. And I think, for one, like the daily thing at this point has, because I've been doing it so long, it's gotten to the point where I can really do them quickly if I have to. And that's, I think, important, is to, always like be okay putting something out at the level that you are. That's part of like the, I think, ethos of it. It's not about what the output is, it's about like making it, right? And at this point I try to like keep, standards that I'm like, I have my own artistic standards that I try to bring them to, but really like doing something every day is what's more important than the quality. And with that in mind, you will see, I've also found like, oh yeah, the quality will just keep increasing, right? In my eyes, right? Like, so that's one piece of it, is that, if I only have 15 minutes, it's also an iterative practice in my mind, meaning like I can just go grab yesterday's sketch, and I do this all the time. It's like I grab it and then I play with it, right? And see if I can find something new. And that can usually take a lot less time, right? If I'm just riffing on an idea or a system that's already in place, I can do that in 15 to 20 minutes if I have to,
right.
Which is
Change
important
the render
for balance. The color palette, the perspective, the post effects, the all of that stuff, the parameters. You can easily, I think, find really diverse things when you're doing generative art, because the system has so many parameters, right? And you get faster at knowing the bang for buck parameters, I think. Like what things can make an impactful change. That is like, I think, what I've just been looking at for 6 years is like, having that in my head. It's like, if I want to make, and also building that bi-directional feedback flow, which we could talk about, where you've done enough sort of building of things that like what the output is from a given action or step or process, and then therefore when you see something, you can sometimes work back and say, this is how I'd make it. And I think you have to like build that bridge, right? And it's not always there. There are things I see where I'm like, how do I make that? I don't know, right? And that's where I'm also most interested, where I'm most inspired, where I'm like, I see something and I can't figure out how to make it, or
the challenge almost. Yeah,
the challenge, and then it's identifying the challenges that are also within. This is the hard part, I think, for some, and I have a kind of a natural, like, I think it comes pretty naturally to me, but I know that like finding those projects that stretch you the right amount is hard. I think like, saying, oh, this is something that is achievable and I can sit down and do it in 3 hours, but I don't know the solution right now. I think it's I want to loop back to the question, but this is just like, it reminds me of something like the benefit of something like January, which is that month of generative art prompts in January that I've done 2 years now, and I regret not doing more because it's really great, is having a prompt that's not internal really forces you to it really forces you to like look at things in a new way. And I feel like the last 2 years, I've come up with all these like things that I wouldn't have normally. It's like, maybe I should get a deck of Brian Eno's oblique strategies or something, just for like
random words that you can focus on.
So it's cool, but so I think to loop back, you were asking about the balance of it as well, because I got a little bit onto the utility of it, but the balance, being able to do it fast, like it's just like letting yourself also do it fast where you are. Like for me, it's just that I've built that workflow where I can do things that I think have similar quality, but I'll loop back to Beeple just for a second, because his first year of dailies is so interesting to me, because they're all like drawings and none of them are, I would say, like really look professional, but that was not the point, right? And you look at his trajectory, especially those like first 10 years, it's kind of interesting to look at, and you're like, okay, you see progress, and that's what's more important. It's sharing it and having the progress. And knowing that this is about doing it every day, and that in doing it every day, you'll get better. Like that's all you need to know. And I think it's hard to share. I know, like, I talk to a lot of people who like get stuck sharing things that they don't feel are perfect
Are finished.
or
Yeah.
are finished. And it's so one really good thing that this does too is like, I mean, I also struggled with like perfectionism, right? Especially in music, but also visually, like when do you call it done? When do you share it with the world?
Yeah.
And I think the practice of dailies gets you out of that, like it has to be perfect mentality,
Totally.
because you have to finish it. You only have a day at the most. You could spend all day on it. I mean, I wouldn't suggest it, but like, you really have a finite amount of time to make something. And that's, I think, really a valuable skill to practice too. So yeah, I mean, there are definitely times I'll say like where it's like after midnight or something and I haven't done my sketch and I'm like, God, I gotta do this. And you just make yourself do it. I've done it at like 3 a.m. while I'm traveling internationally and I have to fly the next day. Like it's not, there are times when you're like, okay, it sucks right now, but this is the thing I'm doing and I'm not going to stop doing it. And that is like, does require a degree of willpower. But it also, for me, it has momentum in the sense that I've been doing it. So I'm like, I don't want to stop. I don't want this to be the excuse. Right.
Right.
So,
because if I take one day off, then maybe I'll take another day off, and maybe I'll, not do the.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Have you taken days off? Like, do you find days that you've taken off or banked up things and things?
I think banking is fine in my book. Like if I come up with like, sometimes I will sit down and I'll generate things that can be good for like 2 or 3 days, Also, like there are times when I know I'm going to be in like an intense week, like going into an installation week or traveling. Like I traveled to China in 2019 for 10 days and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to post to Instagram. I've not really like VPNs. Sure, it should work. Right. Yeah. And so that was actually a funny week where I pre-made 10 posts and I had my partner post them, because I was like, I
want to make sure to have that.
I want to make sure it happens. So that's another part I didn't really say is like, it is also for me, like posting every day or doing something every day is kind of the rule, like having something that I share. But I think you can be like, there's no reason to be crazy about it. Not crazy is the wrong word, but like intense about it to the point that it punishes you as in your well-being. I think like if you can bank things, then great, but you will run out of them and you'll have to make something again. And making something is the goal, right? Getting yourself
also
to keep
banking is still, you're still making the thing, right?
Yeah.
You're still doing it. Like it's kind of fits into the ethos. Like the daily is the word, but like the idea is make things, right? Like,
right. Yeah. So I think like even if I like missing a day shouldn't be the end of the world too. Like if you miss a day, it's like, well, just don't let that stop you from keeping making things, right?
For sure.
I think it's like the framework that I find useful too. But again, like I know some people, they try it for a month and they're like, that was the hardest thing I've done. I can't keep doing that, and that's cool. Yeah. Like it's good to try it and good to find a balance that works for you. And like it can be a really good tool. I think about it as a tool for myself. Like it's a way to get myself, to keep myself in the habit. Really.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of questions in here because I don't know. It's just been recently, like a few people I've spoken to have mentioned this, and I think I spoke about this. I don't know if we talked about this on. I think we did mention it before, but at the beginning, just how it can help when you're kind of feeling creatively down or not having a focus, and something that personally I'm been struggling with recently is like I've been focused so much on my job, which is very creative. I'm building systems and coding a lot of like UIs and interfaces, and I'm working on a plugin in Unreal. So I'm doing stuff, but my creative output is like kind of limited to when I have a VJ gig, which I have one actually in a few weeks that I should probably get ready for. But but in between, I'm like, I need something to like push me. It's not enough. Like I'm scratching my creative itch, so I'm like not motivated to like sit on the computer and make art because I'm feeling I'm feeling satisfied. But at the same time, I know, like anybody, it's like a muscle, and if you don't practice this muscle, it becomes stale. It becomes a little bit harder to get back into it, and your aesthetic gets a little bit weird, and you're your color palette gets weird and things start getting a little bit weird.
It's maybe good, right? No.
What? Which could be good. Could be good for sure. For sure. But I like my compound colors. I don't want to mess with those. So so I'm just like thinking I should try and do this. And then I'm not a perfectionist, but I definitely struggle with like wanting to like, I don't know if it's like confidence thing or like maybe like a embarrassment, you know, or like, oh, I've been an artist for a decade. I have to like keep a standard of something. I don't know, like in my mind, you know, like I don't actually think that's what it is, but something there. So it's like, you kind of mentioned it before, but do you have like a checklist of like, is this ready to post, or like, does this feel good enough for me, you know?
I think it's like, yeah, the checklist is definitely internal. I like kind of, I feel it when it's done, you know? That's a good question though. I don't know. At this point, I don't think too hard about it though.
Yeah.
I can usually like look at the thing and be like, can I post this? And it's like a yes or no, like very easy to be like no or yeah, like yes. Sometimes it's you know, I can definitely still fuss around little details at the end, especially like little kind of post effects, like let me get that
like
bloom right, and spend like too long just like poking at the
longer
bloom,
on
right?
the post
It's very
effects
easy to
than
do.
the actual system.
Sometimes no, I mean yeah, but I also do like yeah, there's other times where I'm like, can I do something that's like really different or really lo-fi, or like what's the intention, right? So yeah, I think it's an interesting one, but it's that's definitely one that you have to kind of figure out for yourself and for what you're doing, you know.
Sure.
Not to say like there's not but there's no like checklist. That's not exactly how my brain works. At least it's like very like I see the output and then I kind of like I'm just kind of like cross checking it with where I'm at right now, you know, and I'm like, does it feel? Do I like this? Like, are there things that stick out at me too? I think that's another thing too, is being able to say, and I think this with music too. It's almost harder with music sometimes because it's time based. But not that visual art isn't. But my systems are usually ones where like if I know, like I can often just be like press record and walk away and come back, and I could share it and be confident that I'd like the output. Like that's usually how I'm rolling. Where I'm not obsessing over what seed I'm using too much once I've gotten to the point. So, you know, with music it's different, but being able to tune into it or visually or sonically and like hear or see the things that jump out at you. Like what are those like those details that take me out of the experience, whether it's something that's like a visual artifact or a quality aspect of the visuals, or sonically, is it like a sound that I'm like, that doesn't fit, that needs to be mixed down, that needs to reverb, that needs like, what does it need, right? But solving them, there's always a lot of solutions, right? But I think being able to quickly identify like something isn't right, what is it, is always the goal. Like how fast can you find that? And that takes just practice, I think.
That's good.
Yeah.
That also ties into like the point of it, right? Like not only making something pretty, but learning something or developing your skills. And a huge part of developing skills is, like we keep on saying, the problem solving. What is what is bothering me about the thing? How do I fix it?
Okay. Which I think I'll just say like
please.
Like that is a form, like finding the problem, I think is always the hardest part. Like, and that can be visual. Usually visually it's not as hard. But conceptually, yeah, it's like, what am I even doing is always the hardest question. So anyway, totally. I know that's a whole other can of worms, but
it definitely is. Before we open it, just one more anecdote on this Dailies thing, because I think you're so very pro at it. When you do develop a system and you reuse a system from day to day, is there a moment where you're like, okay, I'm done with this system? How do you kind of like quantify that of like, I'm going to move on now. I'm not just going to change the palette. I'm not just going to change the seed. Is it just, again, like just natural? You're just feeling it? Or
it's kind of like, one, am I bored? Like, is it really important? And I think boredom is important, like being bored sometimes and kind of being bored with your own work. Yeah, it's when you're like, oh yeah, okay, rhetorical, right? No, but I think it's I like to try to also change more than just say like the color, right? I try to change qualities about it, make it seem like, can I push it in a way that feels distinct within the same world, but different enough that I could call it its own thing. And
Right.
there's sometimes a point with a system or a sketch where I'm like, I don't really have anything else to do with this right now, like off the top of my head. I sometimes will say, can I do something like dramatic with it? But if I don't have like immediate ideas with it, I might then look for another. I either there's a lot of different paths, right? Because sometimes I do get inspiration to do something, and I'm like, this is my next sketch. Like I see something that's I'm like, can I recreate this concept? Can I recreate this idea? Here's a tutorial or a tool that I think is worth me actually looking at. Because I actually don't watch a lot of tutorials these days. It's like only if they're like, I'm like, oh, I really need to know that, then I'll look at it, right? So, but there are those instances. There's people who are releasing like T3D. I'm like, oh, like I might want to do something with that, like Joseph's tool, or
Shout out Joseph.
Mini
Helps.
UV's got some really cool stuff lately. I've been playing with, and so
Really great stuff.
if
Shout
I
out
see
UV.
something that excites me, shout out.
He was on the podcast.
For sure.
Yeah.
I saw that. Yeah, it was cool. I think like if something excites me externally, that often will become the impetus. If I have that inspiration, if I don't, it's sort of like there's always a breaking point where I'm like, okay, I'm kind of bored with this. Maybe I'm going to go play with pops, or I'm going to go try to do something with this old idea that I had. And usually like looking at an old idea with even eyes that are a month or two newer or
makes a huge difference
future,
for sure.
Yeah. Then you're like, oh, what if I do this now? And so, there's a lot of looping back in my work. I'm like, I mean, I love like those complex systems, and I have a lot of those in my palette that I can pull in. And it's like, if I'm playing with a new sort of rendering technique, I'm like, what if I make this cellular automata? Like, what if I, can I use like Boids in this, like to say it as a Bostoner. I'm not a Boston.
Boids.
Boids. Think of the Gary Larson Far Side comic. Boyd watching,
yeah, for sure.
But like how can I, and sometimes I forget about all those things too. Like I'm like, oh yeah, what have I done? And then I'm like, oh yeah, there's this thing that I haven't touched in a year. What if L systems or like tiling, or like there's just like so many cool. I have a whole like Trello of just like random links to stuff that I've organized too, where I'll just go back there and be like, oh yeah, there's this weird paper I found. Can I actually understand it this time?
Implement it. Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. And you don't really loop anything, right? It's more just like, are you?
Oh no, I have loops for sure.
You do loop a lot of stuff. I mean, like in your dailies, like a lot of it is kind of just right. Am I wrong? I mean, they're kind of like pretty long, I guess. Some of them.
Oh, but some of them are loops that are
they are
long.
loops.
Like
they are.
It depends. So it depends on the system I'm working with. Like a lot of them are seamless loops. But if it's like noise driven, and I've got some tutorials where I talk about how to get seamless loops, and I do a lot of that. And sometimes I have works where I'm like, I'm doing a loop and this is 10 seconds long. Other times I have works that like, if I need to do a 360 camera rotation, oftentimes a 360 rotation in 1 minute is like the fastest I want to do. So you get some that are like minute long loops. But then when I get into complex systems like reaction diffusion, cellular automata, like Boids,
it's
like
harder
any
to
of these,
get to it.
They don't naturally loop, right?
Yeah, you have to force it, right?
Yeah, or even like come up with convoluted ways to do it. Like there's not easy ways to do it, and I don't, or like ways that don't feel clunky.
I guess my question was more focused on like, is that important to you, to make it a loop? But I guess
the answer is like if the intent is right, because if I'm planning on like, if I'm like I'm making a loop today, then it's important that it loops. If I'm working with a system that doesn't, maybe I would like, maybe the goal, I don't usually do this for a sketch, or I could, but maybe I'd be like, oh, I'm going to see if I can make this thing that I don't know how to loop, right? That could be a goal. Not always possible. So that's part of identifying what is doable in a given amount of time. That's why I don't often attempt those complex systems, because I don't think that they naturally loop typically, right? That's not what they're based on. The previous frame, and that's the new state is based on that previous frame. So finding ones that loop, it's like, it's a deep problem.
Yeah, no, for sure, because it's also like the aesthetic, or like, is this ready to post, is kind of goes into that of like, if it's not a loop, is it okay? If and that's kind of I think a lot of people think about that as well. Like that's maybe a way to hinder your output. Okay, I mean, I have so many more questions, but we're going to save them for the second part.
Sure.
And I want to jump into your set here. We're going to jump now into Mr. PolyHop's computer and see a little bit of what he has ready for us. I'm very excited. So take it away, Simon. Ooh,
cool.
Already.
So,
beautiful.
Oh yeah, I mean, I can hit play in a moment. This is a piece called Dust, and it's unreleased at this point as an audiovisual piece, 4-minute long audiovisual piece. I did 2 of these recently for it's not actually, I don't know how much I can share about it, but anyway, there's an outdoor transparent LED kind of display that ultimately I created these for, but I also wanted to sort of push my personal like audiovisual pieces a little bit further, since it's been a long time since I've done one, and so I'm looking to do more of it. So it's like a good excuse for that. I don't know how much we want to play here of it, but I can hit play. And additionally, like a good example of, or a good reason for me to sort of get back into kind of producing tracks. Oh, this is needs to be toggled to real time for the music to play correctly here. There we go. But yeah, a good kind of excuse for me to like compose music and visuals that are intended to be like unified. I think that that's like a core, not to get too much into philosophy, but when I think about creating audiovisual work, I really like creating them at the same time, and like the visuals are intended to go with the music, and the music is intended to go to the visuals, and working on strategies for making those kinds of pieces. So this was definitely like one of 2 pieces where I really, both the music and the visuals, I'm like thinking about it as an audiovisual piece from the beginning, and part of the strategy of creating it.
I mean, it's absolutely beautiful, dude. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. This was interesting. I'll just say too, from a process perspective, the visuals were like fast, and the audio took me so long to get right. The other one I'll share after this, the opposite. The music came together in a weekend, and then it took me way longer to finish the visuals. So like, it's also, I think, interesting how that can kind of work. But yeah, behind the scenes, like this one, I also think I ultimately kept a cleaner network. You'll see that with the other one. Like I have my audio here. So one thing I'm doing, which I might improve in the future. This is actually a cool, handy tool on the right. On the forums, it's like an audio analysis tool that I use that's just lets you kind of get like different signals out.
What's
from,
it called?
say, like an input. Oh man, what is it called? I'd have to pull it up. I think like it's a old one. It's like, I mean, I've had it for almost like a decade, so it's deep in there. Maybe
Dude,
audio beat follower or something.
Audio
like,
beat follower. This is
or
crazy,
beat follower.
dude. It just like totally evolved into this crazy thing. This is so cool.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So like,
That's amazing.
yeah, we can get to that too. But here's where I'm driving. Like, I've got one of these for each stem that I just like, and I'm not using all of them, but I have this handy if I need it. Right? Is like signals that are driven by, say, like the kick drum, other things like that. And then the actual rendering here and the export. Right? So I also have a preview. I don't have to dive into that, but yeah, then the actual system here, like this is a Ferum system that I did. I think I built it as part of like our Ciliath's compute shader course. And so I was like, I want to use that for this sketch, like this audiovisual piece. So in here, it's really like a giant GLSL I mean, it's a like a lot of it's happening. The magic is happening in this shader, which I won't necessarily open up, but it's like a Ferum. Might be a compute shader. Let's see. No, it's just a regular. Yeah, it's just a regular pixel shader. Yeah, in any case, I've got all sorts of inputs here. Sometimes it's like hexagonal stuff. So creating like distance maps from different inputs, or I use circle packing at one point. So different kind of concepts that create the different forms that the particle system is like being influenced by, and then a lot of that is being. I think that I was like my timeline here. I was trying something new, and I think it worked out pretty well. Where I have basically presets that I've set, and then I have a frame that I want it to change, and like a amount of time for it to transition. And so, it was one of those things where like this whole system here really is just like all of the parameters are so nuanced that small changes in like the sensor angle, for instance, can create really like it's the combination of all of these that makes the quality of the system. And so I found like finding a way to like capture all of my presets, and then I'm using like this sort of export channel name is path parameter, which I think is underutilized. I think it's actually can be really powerful because I can turn this off, and then I have like I can play with my parameters again, right? And I can turn this back on.
That's nice.
And it pops right back, and it's just you just have to name it right. It's like the name of the operator and the parameter, and it that's like a great kind of hidden, like maybe unknown way of exporting. I don't know how many folks use this, but it can be really powerful.
That's really powerful. So it just automatically kind of goes onto your parameters.
Yeah. So like I have all the parameters here that I have a different tool that just captures the parameters from this. It's kind of a funny little like system. I don't know. I might improve this later. It's like the first time I built it out. So I have all of my possible presets here, and I can load them, and things like that, and then. This one is what the op control is like what actually takes, it's like, it's a little bit, I think it could be cleaned up a little bit, but this is like selecting one of the presets from this base, and it filters it over time. So like I can control the filter. And for this system, it was kind of important because I'd already built like it's such a sensitive system, that to slight changes, like, you probably saw, you can probably mute it at this point, but like, the different forms that these the system takes, and like it's very small changes or like subtle relationships between like these that give you the output. So finding a way to like blend between them, it was an interesting challenge, but ultimately I think that's like where I have very few animation, like I kind of animate the color and when the audio is driving it, and like some other things like that.
But the rest is just like you're letting the system just like reload or whatever.
Yeah, I came up with like looks, like, I'm like, oh, this is cool. Like at the beginning, that whole way that it like emerges from
comes
this,
out.
right?
Yeah.
Like that's a different, like we'll see like once the next one kicks in is like 1000. So I don't know. Then we go to swirls at 1000. And then we start seeing these things change, and you'll start to slowly. It's like I wanted this one to be really gradual overall. Like there's not a lot of moments where there's like a cut. There isn't any cuts, right? It's all one system for the whole time, and so
right.
For that, it was necessary to like really just move between these in like a glacial way most of the time. There's moments where there's like more of a bang, but a lot of these are like 20-second filters, and then there's some 5 seconds at the end when it's kind of ramped up. So I don't know. Did you have other questions? I could dig into this one more, but
are you joking? So you're kind of like the timeline is almost just like per frame. You're switching between the different presets, and then you're like animating between the parameters, or is it more just like you're just switching them and then the system's just kind of recalibrating itself.
No, yeah, there's a filter. So that's what this like filter per
How long
line is. So like once I hit 1000, it switches the parameter here. Like it changes
the preset.
yeah, it changes the preset, but because the names are all the same, it lets me like filter it. Right? So it's not like there's not like a new parameter that pops up. That would break it. But this filter is based on the parent. The parent is pulling from, I think it uses this, excuse me. There's probably, yeah, here it changes. There's just like a little dat execute.
To change the filter amount.
Yeah, it says, change the control and the ID, which is very simple. It's just like change the ID to this, whatever ID that name is.
I don't think I know the filter chop well enough. I didn't even know you could do that with the filter chop. Just like be able to change between the same parameters. Like it's just taking the one before and changing it, or.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch here, like, is there a moment where it changes? It's really just like, it just smooths the values over this amount of time.
Gotcha.
It's similar to the lag. It's not too different.
It's similar to a
It
lag?
has
Okay.
Yeah, it has a different shape to it. I like
Gotcha.
usually gravitate towards filters because it's it has like some different shapes. But the lag is its own thing. The lag, it feels like it's like if you want something to kind of ease into wherever you are.
Right.
Whereas
right.
this is like I want it to. It's like I want it to be a 20-second transition, and this kind of Gaussian shape, right?
Gotcha.
And you can see it happening right here, like the values are changing, and they kind of ease in at the end as well because it's this Gaussian type. But
okay, and then I guess before we jump into the actual system itself, because that's probably going to be very fascinating. This the what you were doing with the exporting. I love that. So could you just talk about that just for a moment, because it was it was like a small anecdote, but there are different levels of watchers or viewers.
Yeah. So like here, this is like I've pulled this from this is like the parameters and the values. So this is the parameter name and the value name. What I've already the preset system has already captured that. So when it goes to a chop from a DAT, the name of the channel is the name of the parameter. Name, it's funny that name is not excluded, but it shows up here. It doesn't really matter because it doesn't exist. I could have actually probably not pulled that in. I was working fast on this actually. But here I have to rename it. And I think like you can change the export route. And I was like, I think I decided it was just easier to like have the null at the same level. But I think you can go up a level. It was just easier for me to think about at that day. But here I'm saying, okay, I think it's part of the naming is why I did that. Because so it's the name of the operator of the parameter, and then like a colon, and then the name of the parameter. Right. So you have to rename it. So I'm basically saying like, change this to agents : star. So it adds.
You're just adding the name of the node, I guess.
Yeah, so which in this case is agents. And then this is just like channel name is path : parameter. Like it's right there in the method.
Channel name is path parameter. Interesting.
Yeah. And then if you just toggle on the export flag, it will automatically export. And this is something that's interesting with kind of the export versus
referencing
expression debate, and when you should use one or the other. And there are definitely times when I've been asked that I have like forgotten some of the reasons to use exporting, and one of them definitely is that you can drive it externally. So like I've done this before where someone else is working on like a tox, they tell me what these are, and I can actually like build a system that exports it to it. I don't have to I don't have to put expressions on their work at all when I'm collaborating. I just am like, okay, those are the parameters. I'm just going to export to it, and that means that like they can do whatever they want to it, and I can control it. Right. Another instance too, I think the exports have been useful is like, or are useful is when you want to copy and paste something. If you have an expression, you have to go and update them all. But with the exports, it's all relative, and so that it'll fix it. It'll do it for you. when you copy and paste it. So
I really very rarely use exports because I like having the hard connection. But I mean, this is a really good use case for it, where you can have things bound, but then also it's like almost you're having best of both worlds, where you can kind of have the expression, right?
Because I can turn this off now, and I have to turn this off to come up with new parameters. Like I can't, if I want to come up with a new
changing it, you would ruin your
yeah.
expression, and you'd have to it would be like a pain in the ass. Really,
exactly. Yeah, you'd have to. You could write something that would put your expressions back, I guess.
Right.
Like that's the other way to do it.
Yeah, that would be
that
would be kind of silly.
It'd be similar if possible, but there's a lot of different workflows that work, obviously. But yeah, this is just. I
just never knew that you could do it like that. That it could. Get the channel name as path parameter. So because usually exporting is a little bit more convoluted, but I love that you can actually do it that way.
Yeah. I will say the other instance I've used this is recreating like complex like I did like one piece where I had to like animate like a Gundam kind of mech, and it came in with like a super complicated like bone what's it called, like hierarchy, and it's like I actually built a tool that like replicated the hierarchy as nulls, and then I could use a similar like op find dat to like automatically capture the state of it, and then generate like export specific animations to it that interpolated. So I set a pose, and then I could interpolate between those poses by using the same method, that because I was like, I don't want to write expressions for all this.
Right.
Like, so I basically like, selectively, I didn't do all of it because it was a little heavy, but I'm like, okay, these are the important joints to move. Let's capture those at different points, and then use this export method, and it like worked really well, because then I could just like come up with a bunch of poses, and then it wasn't like, it was kind of goofy, but it was okay for the project. It was like, because it didn't always make sense kinematically the way that it interpolated, but it was still fun, and it worked for what we were doing, right? And so it was, so there's like definitely good uses of this, but anyway, that's
sweet.
Good takeaway.
Very good.
Okay, well, what other questions?
Let's look at this. Let's look at the system.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I poked at a little bit. I showed a little bit of what's going on here. I mean, this is, if you're unfamiliar, it's like Ferum. There's a lot of folks. David Braun has a great kind of like open source example on his GitHub that I've learned a lot from. This was me building that same system from like same concept from scratch during a workshop, which I has different qualities than some that are out there, but and then I know that like the aforementioned Mini UV has a nice like 3D example of it as well. So there's a lot of cool resources out there that you don't have to build your own, but I've sort of built in some different inputs here. So like one thing I think I enjoy in this one is I have some things like the search distance, which is how long. Not going to go too deep into like what Ferum is, but the agents look a certain amount of distance in front of them, and also an angle. So they search within an angle as they're moving, and they're following like a trail, this feedback trail here. And so this is like kind of the concept is like the agents leave a trail, and they also look at the trail to determine where they move. And so between those two, you can come up with like pretty simple rules that make this kind of complex output. And so, one of the things that
the hexagon one is super cool.
Oh yeah, the hexagon one. So that one is like, we can get to in a moment, because I'm talking about this input here. Is we have these parameters. These are like kind of the key Ferum parameters, I would say, like the search distance, the angle, the movement step, which is how fast it's kind of updating, or how much it's updating each step, and or moving each step, I guess was the right way to say it. And I am defining like ranges of that. So like this is the canvas, and I'm using noise in this instance right here, and you can even see like, if you look, I mean, some of these, it's maybe a little bit hard to see because there's a lot of these happening at the same time. But I don't think it's exporting it. Yeah. But especially like the circles, for instance, like this is the movement step. And so it's anywhere it's black, it's like moving slower. or in smaller steps. And so you get these clusters where it jumps really fast over the spaces, right? And so this is like defining, and at the top, I have these like ranges. So that's part of what I'm animating. Is I'm saying like, well, the movement step goes from 0.02 to 1, which is remapping this texture input. And so similarly, like for angle and search distance, all of my parameters have possible ranges for those parameters as well as like a base range. I probably need to clean it up somewhat because it's a little redundant to have like 2 movement steps, but there's sort of a logic to it. And so it's cool because then I can not only like a lot of times you get like those like parameters on the top level are just like, here's your parameter for the system. And this was like a way to be like, can I, you'll see this with like reaction diffusion. People will look at, can you take the F and the K, the feed and the kill rates and vary them across the map or the canvas. And so this is just me doing that with like the Ferum. It's like, the search distance and the angle are also varied by noise, or in this case, it's circle packing, which is its own system here. Like there's a whole additional, in this case, compute shader that's doing the circle packing and exporting. It's like, amazing that this actually runs at 30 to me sometimes. But, so similarly, like the hexagon, it's like just really hexagon tiling here, that I've got driving it.
Do you think that like, is this almost all of this is going to be shaders, right? Like you're not doing much with the quote unquote built-in TouchDesigner stuff?
No, I do a lot. Like here, it's the hexagon stuff is no shaders, right?
Okay.
The circle packing is shaders, but there's like, I throw maths and lookup ramps and all sorts of stuff in
right.
there.
You'll keep it external as much as you can.
Yeah, it's a mix. Like if I have the system working, like sometimes I'll be like, oh, there's an easy way to add that to the shader. But other times I do it in the shade. Like if it makes sense to do it in the shader, maybe is when I do it there. If it's something like defining inputs, I might, here I'm like point generators, point transforms.
Easier to see it visually.
Yeah, like I might have other, like this is just it takes something and turn, I don't know, it says GLSL 2 pi, so it probably, really simple. Just like multiplies it by 2 pi.
What is
like
that
really
for,
sort of,
out of interest?
It's just I guess it's just that might be actually a holdover from something else. Like I don't know if it's that important. It's like the initial angle, maybe. I think it's randomizing. You see that blue goes from 0 to 2 pi, so it's randomizing the initial angle, and that's just for the like the feedback position because it's like X, Y, and angle are stored because it's 2D. So I use the blue.
You're using Z for the angle.
Yeah.
Or the blue, I should say.
B and Z. It's all the same. U, yes, or UV, S, S. So that's like a lot of what's happening in here. And so, the audio, obviously, you saw that like the hexagons, for instance, are drawing from my audio to, so I have that here. I'm like selecting my kick to make I broke it right there. Yeah. So you can see that like this is animating the noise
right
based on the kick. And
could you show this a little bit from beginning to end? So so you started from a noise.
Yeah. So there's this is selecting from the audio, and I've been using internal operators here, which is super great because I can copy this anywhere and it selects that operator. And then I've got kind of like a speed. So like anytime the kick happens, it like pushes the value forward. That's sort of a one way of like animating noise when it doesn't need to loop. But you can also do that around a circle, of course. There's ways to use this as well in a way that kind of loops. But so we've got our noise. I'm using that to drive the noise coordinate map. Sorry to keep cutting the audio in and out, just distracting to my ears.
I can turn it off if you want.
Then I can keep playing it, but it's just whether
go for it.
You can mix it in if you want. So the noise coordinate map, so it kind of creates this like, this is funny because I don't know how much this like really impacts the output, which is sort of funny. This is, I think, actually or like it's so subtle. Like a lot of this was just like vestigial, and it created the output I wanted. But you can see like this is just animating the hexagons, which I think show up here. Yeah. And you can see that like with the music, it animates more and less.
Is it just instance hexagons?
Yeah, this is just instance hexagons, and this is actually I think I've done my own system of this before, but I also this one I just pulled from Kohoi's like Noto, the
talking ball.
Cloud ball.
Cloud?
Yeah, one of those.
Ball?
I think it's ball.
Noto.
Sorry. Yeah. But anyway, I this is like that system, but I've made some modifications because I also like you want to use, for instance, the where am I looking here? Like for instance, I don't think this system used a remap, but I used the remap for the UV instead of just fitting it. This is what it did previously, but this doesn't actually give you. This actually resamples the texture based on where that hexagon is. This actually fits a hexagonal grid into a
that's what I was going to say. It's like
grid.
It's a very different type of grid, right?
Right. And this actually mostly works, which is what the tutorial does, and it looks fine. But you actually do, for certain instances, you get like every other line is like offset. And so you get this funny staggering thing if you like map video to a hexagonal grid from a grid without, say, using the actual position. So this uses the XY position and then normalizes it. This should be an expression. I don't know. This is like, again, stuff that I'm just like, oh yeah, that's funny. But it remaps it. So I think texture remapping is super useful when you want to like resample something based on arbitrary points, because it'll put it in the right spot. So that's what I'm doing here for things like this, the resampling of that texture. But again, here it's so abstract, it like doesn't really matter. This is just like, again, I think I pulled from something that existed, and maybe this mattered more. Whereas like if I did this, it like honestly would probably feel the same as, you know, at the end of the day. Like it doesn't really, I don't see a difference, right? So it's kind of funny, like this is the right way to do it, but also does not matter for this instance. It's a lot of times that's the way things go.
For sure.
Yeah. Cool. Well, do we want to move on to another example? I don't know what time's like.
It's up to you. Up to you. Yeah, cool. We're doing good with time.
Do that. But yeah, this was one that I think was a very different approach. Let me know if you're hearing audio on this. You hear it?
Yes.
I might have to. You do?
Yeah.
Cool. This one was interesting because I composed this one in like a day. Like the music was just like a Sunday, I think. And this is all both of these actually exclusively using the Expressive E Osmos, which again, this is like one of those tools like TouchDesigner that if I talk about it, you'd say like, are you getting paid to talk about it? Because I love it so much that like, you know, I just kind of sing its praises naturally. But the Osmos
must be
is
a really good tool.
It's like my favorite keyboard like I've ever had / played. It's just like extremely nice, and I could talk more about it later. But yeah, it's all, I made it all using that keyboard. It has like pitch bend per note, so you can wiggle a key to get like bends and things like that. It's very sensitive, and it feels really good to play. So it reminds me a lot of like the way an acoustic piano, you can play it differently to get different articulations and qualities of the sound, and it translates really directly for me as a pianist. So anyway, that's what all the sounds are. But then the music came together really fast for this one, whereas the other one I spent like so long trying to get the music right.
Whoa. That was sick.
Yeah, and this one is a lot more systems are happening here that are all getting rendered in a traditional way, I would say, compared to like, or it's just a geometry centric piece as opposed to the other one's just like a complex system, right? That's more of a simulation, and this one is very much like you know, shapes and forms and things that exist in geometry comps and then are rendered together with a camera.
I love this. This look is so nice of these like concentric lines. This is so cool.
It's
like topology. Yeah. It's like, I don't know. I just love it. It's so cool. And the way you shift between 2D and 3D is super nice.
Yeah, I mean, this one's interesting because it's all 3D, but there's like,
Right. So
I guess things that feel
flattens it out
2D.
a little bit.
Yeah, but I think I don't know if this is gonna kill everything, but oh, there we go. You can actually see like, here's my world, right? And I'm moving the camera. Oh, that's actually not even in it. That's just like left over from somewhere. But I do move the camera. I think this is my camera here. Hello. So, yeah. Anyway, this is like the piece. Essentially, it's already almost over, right? But the process here was really different, and I was gonna fix that, but it's fine. Relies like way too much on animation comp, honestly, for my taste. Like the actual I know we're kind of watching it too, but
Oh, I love this look. It's so cool.
oh, thank you. Yeah, I was like happy how this one turned out, and also the way that it like I had it moving to the audio.
Yeah, it's just very pleasing, and like I just love 3D, like the aesthetic, you know, and just the way that this kind of looks. It's very clean, you know. It's very like I don't know, the texture or whatever it is. It's just so clean. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah. But yeah, the actual like, there's just so many like little transitions that I needed to like have my hands on that I couldn't just completely derive from the music. Like a lot of the motion is still that same. This thing's not happy because I have like a weird lister thing, but like a lot of it's driven from the waveform analysis again. But there were like so many things when I was doing it where I'm like, I need to do this very specific thing. Okay, there you go. You got the whole thing.
Super nice.
I want to do
and
this
the music's
very
great
specific
too,
thing.
by the way, Simon. Really
Oh,
nice.
thank you.
Like a
Yeah.
nice little tune there.
Appreciate it.
Ooh, that is
So yeah, not fun. Not fun at
keyframes.
all. Yeah.
Super. It's
But,
really interesting to see the difference. Like the both pieces like are kind of the same intricacy of like things going on. Yet
Yeah.
one of them has all these keyframes and the other one is like completely parametric. Like I just find that very.
Yeah.
It's super. Do you think about that? Like that's really cool.
No, I
Like,
do, and this one I was and it's a very different like process. It's like, yeah, I kind of have to like bring in these different layers and elements, and I was like, well, I kind of want like in this one I was like, I want it to be here. The way to do that is to have it be a keyframe. Like I don't know, you know, like it sort of was the result.
Right.
And also like because the first one, the visuals were easy in a lot of ways because I had the system and I built the preset
You're
tool and I like
manipulating it, going back and forth.
You know, I had a Miro page where I sequenced the different possible looks, and I'm like, here's where this happens in the music, and then I typed in the numbers, and I'm like, that feels good, and I tweaked it, you know. But like, it was a lot faster to animate. Again, the music for the other one hilariously took me like so long. This one, the music was done, and then I was like, I tried probably like half a dozen things in different places here that got axed because I was just like, I don't like how this looks.
Really?
This doesn't work. Like I had this intro. I really liked this this Gerstner wave simulation as like quantized ribbons that I was like, this works for this intro, but where does it go? You know, and then eventually I was like, I do like this B section here. But then I had to figure out how does it transition. So like figuring out how it stretches out to like a thin line, and then how do they exist in one spot, and how does this leave, right? Like how do I do that camera transition? Again, when it comes back in the B section, I'm like, it can't just be the same thing. So I introduced these like this is a 3D boards system and trails, and like I had the like plexus effect, which I think is tasteful here, but sometimes is overused, and hopefully it's tasteful. You know, and so all of that, like, you know, then I would be like, oh, I want it to be a little different in the second section. So then I'm like, well, it's going to move differently, and so all of like the little kind of top, like the large scale changes had to be keyframed because I wanted them to happen at certain times. You know, I was just being a little bit of a control freak about it in a way, but but not in a bad way. I think this is successful because of that curation, perhaps. Whereas the other one, yeah, it's just such a different approach, right? Where this one I've got like 3 geo comps that are all slightly different scenes that happen in the same 3D, and then those might have parameters that I'm animating on the top level, or some of them I just poke inside. Yeah, so I don't know. It was like this one, the TouchDesigner system took way longer to come together and required a lot more. I don't know, just like adding features to do what I wanted it to do. If that makes sense. So
Yeah.
Well, do you have questions about it? Because I think I gave
many
like what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I again like that the geometry kind of ribbon. I don't know. It's more like in the middle. I guess it's kind of like the same, almost the same system.
Oh,
as
this yeah, this one.
I just want to understand more about how it works.
Sure.
Because it's just so pretty.
Yeah, is that this one? Yeah, it's this one. Yeah, like this one starts as a sphere, which you might not know, but you're inside of it. And so I do some like I like this kind of like quantization of noise. I use it a lot lately because it creates like this sort of stepped process. Like when it's like all of these like breaks here is from the quantization. Like if I have a big like a small position step, you get smaller breaks.
You have to do a tutorial on this one, dude. I'm serious.
I should do one. Yeah,
it's such a cool aesthetic. Like just the way that it kind of quantizes and then also has that like depth that's not just like a line, you know?
Oh yeah, and that's like partly like some of these are hard to do as tutorials because there's like so many little like tools and steps in the process that it like keeping my tutorials like a manageable length for me to actually produce has been an interesting challenge.
A 1 hour tutorial.
Like the one I'm working on now that I need to get out in the next like week or so once I do get through the other things I have on my plate. It's like 2.5 hours or 3 hours of like media that I need to cut down, and I'm like, I gotta do like shorter, but like things that I can get across faster, you know, or that build on each other in ways. But yeah, this one, it has these like ribbon deformer that I use sometimes, and so it's just figuring out how to like cover that, which is its own tutorial in and of itself, basically.
Is it is it like when you say ribbon deformer, is it literally just like stretching out the line?
Yeah, and actually this is see, I don't have all of these like in my head. Like there is a tutorial that shows how to do this that I learned how to do it in, and if I can find it, I can reference it. I think it doesn't have the name in here, which is maybe a bummer that I just like didn't, when I followed it, I forgot to be like comment at the top with a link to what I followed. But it is it's a vertex shader, and it's like a lot of it's happening here. I could probably even send you the link later to
I'd love to see.
I can dig it up. I've been meaning to dig it up because I'm like, what was that tutorial? Because I use this thing a lot, and if I ever do a tutorial where I talk about it, like it's a way of doing something you can do in Pops for sure, but it's useful where like you feed it this position texture. Where this is an example where I'm using a 2D texture to do it, and if I hit V, you can see that like it's actually the same thing here.
It's so on the sphere itself.
Yeah, what this is like each column is a tube, or it might be a row. Actually, I think these are shorter. I don't know. Okay. I can't remember really for exactly, but it uses this as the sampler. So it looks like, yeah, there might be discontinuities in it, and that's okay. I can't really remember, but it's been a second since I've like dug this deep into this tool. But yeah, like vertical. I think it's vertical. Like there's like 100 tubes, and like each one's 1,000 points. And it basically just like takes a tube and deforms it along that line,
right?
Which is it's very handy because it happens on. I think what I like about this is it's like more efficient than the line material, which you could also use to do this, but not really from a texture. And so it it does this on the GPU is it deforms a bunch of tubes. And,
It's
you know, I don't know if what are we looking at here? We're not, so I think some of these like, oh man, where am I? Sometimes I'm like forgetting where different parameters are. Like this one doesn't have those exposed, but I think it could even just be you have to. Oh no, yeah, I'm varying that from the audio. So like there's audio that changes some of these things.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it you know, a lot of this is happening here. Like up to this point, you know, you could get a similar effect by instancing these, you know.
But it would not run as smooth as this, for sure not.
It might. I mean, this is
but
not
also,
that many points. It's only 1,000 by 100. But well, yeah, it would actually probably be slower depending on your hardware.
It would be a little bit slower. But then what about?
Yeah.
But then also after you instance them, how are you getting them to like extrude like that in that kind of like?
There's
manner?
two of them, the fill and the ribbons. So like there's.
Gotcha.
Oh God, what did I do? Slope. Did not mean to create an operator. Yeah. So like there's the ribbons. This is the fill, and this is the ribbons, right? And so it's the same input, but the fill is actually just I just am using a different geometry.
Instead of a line. Gotcha.
Yeah. So instead of a tube, I use just a rectangle.
Gotcha.
So it's actually kind of fun because I can, like, I don't animate this at all, but like this rotation, you'll notice like rotates the.
Oh yeah,
fill.
look at that. That's super cool.
So
Super
you could
nice.
totally like animate that in the like if I did like a
make it
abs
different.
time seconds, actually frame would be better here, and then like go back. Is it actually? Yeah, it's kind of too slow, but like you can see how it's animating. If I really want to make it like whip around, you can see how it's rotating.
So yeah, it's really cool. And then okay, so now I get it. I get a little bit more understanding. So it's like you're really just instancing, but you're using the shader to kind of get the positions in a much more efficient way, I guess.
Yeah, it's just feeding those in and then using that to deform. Like the trails are that same thing too. I think that those could be like the flocking system.
The Boyds.
The Boyds, yeah. I mean that's like there's a here's the flocking. So it's its own like GLSL network, and then it also feeds into like ribbons here. But this one is using a 3D texture. So I have like too many. So I'm actually doing them in depth, right? So this one I have two res X, res Y, and a depth. And if I want them to be longer, I make this like 60.
Huh.
Oh, and there you go. You have like longer trails. You can see them going woof.
Interesting.
Or 120. And then it takes a second, and then it's like, whoa, it's really not intent. Like there's something weird happening, and that's probably because I like, you know, I'm doing some other things to this. What?
With the
Oh
audio,
no, now it's caught
probably.
up. It's caught up now. Yeah, it takes a second to fill the buffer with the trail, so it gets some discontinuities.
Now
But, that's a fun one. Yeah, you can see it's just like so long, and then if I make this 10, you get like little short ones.
Sweet. And then I guess I have two more questions about the again my the thing that I like with the lines. Sorry, I'm so focused on that one.
No, the
Geometry. So the way that you're shading it is really interesting. Is it completely material, or are there some lights going on there?
Good question.
Definitely looks shader-esque.
Yeah, there's I think it's a Fong at its core.
Okay.
So you know, it's not anything that crazy, and then there's a light and SSAO. Like I think that I do bloom, but it's not actually that crazy.
Okay.
Like it's a pretty.
But it just has a nice look to it. I guess the color is just like really.
I mean, I think it's even blown out. I don't know. I maybe made some changes that I feel like I might be opening a project where I tweak the bloom more, because it's like it's not bad though. I think but yeah, it's a lot of it's like the color I'm animating. Where do I do the color? I think I do it inside of the fill. So there's actually like a little funny little, like it pushes the color through it. There's a point later where it gets really crazy with it, where I'm like offsetting the color of each one.
Of
That's
each
why you
one
get
of them.
yeah, each one of these rows is a ribbon, and then
Uh-huh.
you're like I'm kind of using a feedback system to display offset them based on noise, so you get like the color running down each one differently.
So
Though I've
pretty.
turned it off at this point because I switch it on and off. I just kind of use that right at the end.
It's
Like
super
whoops,
nice.
you know.
And then the camera, is the camera being animated at all, or is it static?
A
the
little
whole
bit.
time?
Yeah, I
bit?
have a field of view that animates, and that might be it. I think I just animate the field of
The
view,
circle
and I might move.
and the sphere itself.
Yeah, I think I've positioned them in the places that I like, but the field of view is like how you get this like this transition, I
Right.
believe. Let's see if we can see. It goes from like 45. When you're inside the sphere,
It's probably
make it a
wider.
wide field of view because I
Yeah.
want you to see more of the sphere. Yeah, here you go.
For sure.
There we go. Yeah, there we go. That transition is
Interesting.
actually just animating the field of view
Right.
because you've always been inside the sphere. Like
right.
the whole time.
You're just going
It's just
from
positioned.
this one animation to the other, or one
Yeah.
like that line to these.
The line is like in the
lines.
distance too. Like if you look at the scene. Oh, where am I? I might be. No, I was in the right spot. Yeah, like here's the camera. One of those. This is a funny orbiting camera that's left over from something. I must not have the some display flag is off. There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, you can see that this is actually right here
Huh. Interesting.
around your camera.
Right.
And then it's animating too. Like I think I'm using
Yeah, I
nulls
can
to
see it's
animate
turning
it.
around.
Yeah. That I'm using I use my ease tool here. Here we go. Like I use a little
Nice.
elastic ease somewhere.
Nice.
Oh, and this is later. I think I've put together like a chained, like a tiered ease. But
just as a little side note, everybody should check out Simon's amazing Patreon and all his tools that he has available there. Some of them are extremely useful and really, really,
thank you.
really great.
Yeah, trying to build it out more and more. That's like a goal for the end of the year is to do a little push, while also trying to keep my sanity. But I am. There's things in the pipe for sure. Yeah. I'm trying to remember where that oh my god, that's inside of my tool. Okay, wait. Where is it? It's like, oops. Yeah, where the actual like, because I feel like I'm using like I have like a physics based kind of like wobble. I can't remember what I called it. It's like a 360, uses
the sphere?
like some kind of for like the Oh, maybe I am just using this ease for that. I think I am. I'm just trying to remember. Yeah, because this it's not because I wanted it to be that little wobble there is just this curve. I definitely have like a camera tool that gives you similar kind of like physics based wobbles in 360, so it looks the right way. Like when you rotate, if you're going from like 355 degrees to 10 degrees and you use like a filter, it's going to go all the way around. But this one goes across the barrier in like a seamless way. So it figures out, I need to actually go, it's a cyclical filter, I think is what I call it. I might even have it over here somewhere if I go to my components, tools. Jeez, find it in my, if I can remember. Yeah, cyclical filter. Yeah, this guy. So if I go like anywhere on it, it's always going to go the right direction, which is very important for anything that's cyclical in nature, like rotating a camera. And then you have like fun little, like if you want it to, it can have acceleration, so it like pushes past the value, or if you just want it to be a normal, if you set these the same, it'll just, or I think it's the rate has to be bigger than the acceleration, then you just get a normal
tool.
I think it's fun. I released it on my Patreon actually. I think it's like super powerful and maybe unknown how powerful it can be. Like I love
this one
I love just being able to be like shoop, and then it kind of comes back and wobbles to the value, and then like for a live performance tool too, like
Yeah, it's
I think
super
I threw
nice.
this. I did like had some friends who were involved with like Burning Man recently, and gave them like this on like a big for one of the pieces, and so it's like you can click this and it makes the whole camera like rotate around. And if you have 3 of these, you can do full like camera rotations around an object and have it wobble, which I think I've done some sketches that showcase that. So
It's a really nice
cool.
little easing in. It's not easing in, I guess. It's like actually wobbling. Super cool.
I mean, yeah, it's an ease effect. I'd say
I
it's
gotta
just
find it.
it's but yeah, cool. Do you have other questions on this? I could also, I don't, if we have time, I can show the
Yeah, let's see
last
one more.
thing. This one's I'm gonna show you the TouchDesigner sketch first, and then this one I also sketched in TouchDesigner and then ported to 3JS. So it's actually like live now as part of this project of like future relics that mine was the concept of like the Ansible, which is a sci-fi concept coined by Ursula K. Le Guin. And so it's meant to like, this is meant to like, there'll be sound later, but this is just the TouchDesigner prototype I made. And the concept itself is like, this is a future relic that it abstractly like represents the Ansible, which is a faster than light communication technology that Ursula K. Le Guin coined and like came up with as a science fiction author. And so her son was involved with this component of the project, which was really cool. And he wrote like an essay, and there's another essay about quantum physics that both kind of accompany this on the website. I should have like had the URL handy. I could probably pull it up. But yeah, it oh, here we go. I even have it. I can pull it right here. Here we go. This is the actual like live page for it. And so it's this cool like I basically just designed the 3JS thing on the right based on the TouchDesigner piece, and then I think you got audio. So as you move the sliders, you get like basically I'm scrubbing between 2 sets of like of audio. I've got like 22 audio layers I created, and you sort of move between them. So yeah, it's this like fun commission, like super cool like concept, very sci-fi based, which dovetails with my own interest in sci-fi. And so yeah, it was a really fun project, but it was one of those ones where like they when they proposed it, I was like, very cool. And then like it has to be online. And I'm like, oh shoot. Like I was like, I want to do this, but I'm not like a web developer. I didn't have prior JavaScript experience. hadn't used 3JS before this project. And so I was like, well, I'm going to do it because I want to do this. It's, it was like conceptually, I was like, this is a fun thing. So yeah. But it was wild because the TouchDesigner example, like I pulled this together in like less than a day, probably a day from existing things that I had floating around. It's actually the same kind of Gerstner wave simulation that I even like used in that animation that we just looked at. And I added this top and bottom UI because it's meant to be communication over faster than light, and thinking, and that whole concept is about the like entanglement of electrons. And so the whole idea is that you move one interface and it actually moves on the other side at the same time, which is like the embodiment of that
I didn't
concept.
notice that. I love that. It's such a cool.
Yeah,
cool
and you can
idea.
use either of them, because when we're thinking about how would you communicate, it's like, well, if you modify it, it's like also modified immediately on the other side, on the other quantum, like the quantum pair. And so that was my sort of solution visually and interactively how to, and then this is kind of a representation of that particle wave duality, and all of that is there. But yeah, then I had to figure out, okay, how do I take this thing that like exists as TouchDesigner and make it in like make it a web app, right? So it was a whole journey there. And now this like ultimately, I know this is probably more about TouchDesigner, but like this is my whole 3JS project that I basically learned how to do it in a couple weeks. Like it probably took me like a week of just like doing like I found this is like a plug that I'm not like, I just found a 3JS journey, I think I was recommended.
Okay.
and it's like a paid course. It was like $100 or something, but
Okay.
totally like helped me jumpstart into it. Because it was organized in a way where I could like basically look at the basics to set up a project and then jump to like, how do I get GLSO working in it? It was like my sort of strategy.
So did you just literally you didn't actually like port the TouchDesigner project? You made it again.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that might be the port, right? Because I recreated it in here, but there's like a lot of code that's the same. You know, if you look
The
at my
GLSL
effects,
stuff and things like that.
yeah, there's like the
Yeah.
dithering effect, which
Gotcha.
I have here. There's like, which is funny. I made this like a year ago and it finally went online. So I was like re-looking at it recently because I also
Nice.
haven't been in this world recently. But yeah, I have my like simulation,
Mm-hmm.
which is the, here's the Gerstner wave, simulation, in the world. I basically like some of the things. It's like I had instanced those squares right in TouchDesigner. This is just an instancing network. It's like super, I just set up noise. It's got color. It's got position based on a grid. And in this one, I was like, well, I guess I have to write a fragment shader. I mean, I could have instanced it, but I think I don't know. I think I did yeah, this looks like a shader. So it was interesting. Like I have a lot of vertex shaders that I had to like figure out how to port. So it was a really good, exercise, but it was funny that at the end of the day, like some things like this has screen space ambient occlusion that's used for that like pre-dithering that gets kind of the quality, the shading quality. And I could like whatever I did with my vertex shaders just like broke the built-in SSAO. Like it just didn't
Stop
work. And then I was like,
things, bro.
yeah, I didn't like the way I was dealing with like, it was, yeah, I actually would have to like revisit it to even remember the nuances of the problem. But I banged my head against it for a while trying to like fix it. And then ultimately just like, I think that this looks actually really close. And I think I just like found another hack, like just like tool to, like, I think I just color things so that they're a little darker around their edges or something. And it worked because it's also, yeah, dithering it too. So it just needed to have like a little more depth to it. But yeah, anyway, so that's like, I think was a fun project. And learning how to like go between the two. It's like something I kind of want to do more, but also given that like it took me so much longer to build it in 3JS, I'm like, well, I'm just fast at TouchDesigner too. But it's nice because this is something that like is on the web and I can share easily. And people, I have a friend who's like, it worked on my phone really nicely. And I was like, that's nice, to have somebody be able to like play with your art on a mobile device is like,
Oh yeah,
kind of
for
new
sure.
to me. I know a lot of people who that's their jam, but I'm like, yeah, I do
No,
installations
3JS
that people.
3JS is wild.
Oh,
Especially
it's
today.
great.
I mean, it's like
great.
you really, it's kind of like the promise of Web3 has been here for a long time, but it's like,
Oh yeah.
it's just very high quality what you can do on it, like the rendering quality, and it's really impressive. There's some really cool tools out there.
Yeah. Well, I guess, did you have questions about this one? I kind of talked about some of this before. But
It's really pretty.
it was
I mean,
fun.
like, it's really, I love the aesthetic, and first of all, it's very impressive that you managed to like actually replicate it almost 1-to-1 in 3JS.
Yeah, it's like a pain,
from
but I did.
TouchDesigner. No, but it's a really
Yeah.
good proof of concept of like why TouchDesigner is such a good tool for experimentation and like rapid prototyping of things. But
Yeah.
then if you're using it in a way that you're using it with GLSL and kind of a lot of computing and stuff like that, then I think it's a pretty good use case for how to get out of TouchDesigner, right? Because TouchDesigner, I obviously don't like to get out of TouchDesigner, but a lot of people want to or need to, for various reasons. I think it's a very compelling kind of aspect to it. Was it difficult to translate like, node graphs or like node logic into, a hierarchy like a web-based hierarchy like that?
I think not a lot, but part of it is that like a lot of this is tops, and then the stuff that's not I think I have enough experience from things like processing and open frameworks before this, and even
Right.
Arduino, that like I'm not, and I do a lot of Python and GLSL, that I'm not afraid of going to that code, like the
Mm-hmm.
text-based code, because I don't want to, like, I would say that this happens sometimes. You see the like, oh, is it code? And I would say yes, like visual programming languages are code, right? It's just a different abstraction. I kind of side railed myself there, but the I'm a stickler about that one. But yeah, the text based code, I there's a lot of times too where like you have to optimize a project and you have a limited amount of VRAM, and you need to take like 3 tops and make it into 1 top, because you're
Right.
dealing with very high resolutions and each one is like 100 megabytes, and then you're like, well, I filled up my card depending on what hardware you have. I know the
Right.
4090s and stuff now, it's like, well, it's rare that I approach 24
Right.
gigabytes,
Right.
but happens.
It does,
And
for
so
sure, for sure.
so being able to like already think in that way of like, yeah, these are all nodes, but like there is a hierarchy, and you kind of have to know that to work in TouchDesigner too. You have to know what the order is of your nodes, not as a beginner necessarily, but once you get into like solving problems regarding like optimizing immersive installations, you do. So
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
it's not, I think that the trickier thing is often finding what the analog is in something like
Line
Three.js.
code.
Yeah, like what is, like how do I access this buffer? Like I think that the one thing that the TouchDesigner does really nicely behind the scenes is manages rendering buffers. So like, every time you go between tops, for instance, you're like loading and unloading a portion of GPU memory, and like you don't really have that, like it manages all that for you, all the resolutions of everything, all of the, this is a 32-bit float, and I could put that into something that's an 8-bit float, 8-bit,
And it converts it fine.
and it just does it automatically because it's got
Right.
this like way of these building blocks that talk to each other really nicely.
Right,
And
right.
so when you're dealing with something that doesn't have that built in, you have to start thinking about those like those details, and if they don't line up, maybe I 3JS might manage it nicely, but definitely like there's things you have to think about that you don't when you're just dealing with like the node environment. Yeah.
Interesting, really interesting, and really cool to see your kind of progress into this world of, different types of environments and coding. Yeah, you're very fascinating in terms of just like your multi-faceted approach to different things. Before we move on, was there anything that you wanted to show us that we didn't look at?
No, I think I just wanted to look at those audiovisual pieces. That's kind of like one of my personal projects I did recently that will, they'll be showed externally, but like, was like, I want to do these things to see where I'm at with like making AV work. And also, kind of, I'm interested in doing more of that. So having a good example of my current work in that area is important, so that if I'm like
For sure.
talking to a musician or an artist and I'm like, hey, like this is what I can do with a piece of music, right? So that was my goal with those, and I was like, yeah, they're also just projects that I feel like I poured a lot of my own creative creative energy into, and it's like a very like personal piece, as opposed to, I don't know, something I did that's a collaboration with sort of where I'm working to bring someone else's vision forward, right? So or to fruition. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And just jumping into the second segment here, or third segment, I guess. I want to start off by just mentioning your band, collective. I'm probably not going to pronounce it properly, but Sajtak?
Sajtak. Yeah,
Sajtak.
almost. Yeah, Sajtak. That's a hard name, yeah.
I'd love to, tell us a little bit about it. We can actually, can I play it? Am I going to get flagged if I play
you can
any
play
other
it.
music?
I hope not. You should.
Okay.
Yeah, you shouldn't. But if you do,
Okay, cool.
we'll cross that bridge.
I'll let you know. Yeah, I mean, tell us a little bit about it. and
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of like the,
Sure.
what it is and what you're doing with it.
Yeah. It's a long time project. I think it's been like, oh man, well over a decade at this, or maybe near a decade, a little bit less. I think 2015 is when we started. It's a 4-person like art rock, experimental rock band. It's hard to put like a label to it, but that's maybe the best like word for it. It's myself, our drummer John Taylor, our vocalist Alex Coy, and bassist Ben Willis. And it's always been kind of like a collaboration where, especially like when we were first playing, like a collective process of composition and performance through a lot of like improvisation, since we all have kind of like pretty extensive backgrounds in free improvisation and just improvisation in general. And so that was like basically like a rock band, but pulling from this sort of free improv perspective, which then coalesced into something that now we have more like songs that we compose, that we structure. But I think when we were finding our sound originally, a lot more like improvisation based work, which to me, like, I don't know, reference points are things like like Nels Klein's work with like BBC, or David Torn has like a lot of work that feels just like Presence feels kind of like an important album in that of like it's actually freely improvised, but it all feels like awesome, just like kind of collaborations within. It's like really the musicians bring kind of their own musical perspective to and that's what it is. And then it ends up being like, when you describe it, you're like, well, it's what happens when those 4 people play together. And that's kind of like the goal of the original kind of intent of the band. And now I think it has more of a sound that like we sort of work within now that it's been so long. But yeah, it's also, I think I'll say, as far as like the history of it, when I think the pandemic hit, we were all like still in Detroit before the pandemic, and then that maybe like kind of threw, I think, a wrench into like everybody's what they were doing. But I think live music especially has been hard. Like I'm lucky that like my work doing interactive media, like it's sort of like they all are professional musicians, and it's like not easy. That's like what they do for their livelihood. And so I think what's been hard is now we're like split between New York and Chicago and Detroit, and so even just playing together is hard. But we, we're still doing it, and we have like we're recording in Chicago in January, so we're trying to keep that rolling and stuff. But I think we've definitely slowed down as far as like how many shows we can do in a given year and how much music we can really make, being so split. But yeah, I don't know. Did I answer everything? I kind of gave you a little
100%.
A breakdown of
100%.
what it is.
Very nice way of explaining. I have to put the audio in after. I can't get my audio in from here for some reason.
No worries.
But I will definitely do that. Yeah, and definitely check it out. SajTech, we'll have a link for it also in the description for sure. Yeah, it must be nice to be able to kind of have this another outlet of your expression and your art that's not art, or whatever, you know what I mean. It's not visual art.
It's not the same thing that I do for. I mean, for some, in a sense, it's like not what I do as my main hustle, so to speak, my main gig.
I think it's important. But, I don't really have an outlet that's creative that's not visual art, and it's kind of like a recurring theme, I think, on this episode, of just kind of like having the ability to find that thing that can, whether it's dailies, whether it's another expression, whether it's something outside of the thing that you're doing. I think it's really quite important, and can help with a block or a low or something like that, or even just helping your work be better, having just some sort of other expression. I'm trying to get into different hobbies that are outside of art, that are completely outside of it. I haven't started yet, so I'm hesitant to talk about it, because there's like that classic thing that if you talk about the thing that you're doing, then you don't actually do it.
It
But
gives your brain some chemicals that's like rewarding. It's like, I'm
yeah,
making
there's like
progress on the thing, and then your brain makes it
you
less
never
likely
do
to
it.
do it.
Yeah.
Right?
But I'm gonna do it. I want to
Hell
get into
yeah.
paragliding. You know, like something completely
Whoa.
outside
Hell
of.
yeah.
Yeah, because it's like it's physical, so I can actually like do things that are like movement, but it's also like, you know, like I try to do jujitsu as well because of the same reason that it's like my brain is being forced to learn a new kind of like pathways and be creative, right? You need to problem solve. You need to learn a new language. If it's, you know, you need to learn how the clouds work and the wind patterns. It's like I want to do things that allow my brain to be in the same place that it's really good at, like problem solving and understanding things and being creative, but not with a computer screen in front of me or like, you know, with the advent of making an art piece, you know?
Yeah, healthier for sure. It's like to do something that's like also active. I think. Like
I
I'm
mean,
pretty
I
bad
need
at
it.
that. Yeah, me too. I just like it's been good lately. My partner and I have actually been like going to yoga, which is really
Nice.
good. But man, it's like hard to get into that when you haven't done it in so long. I'm just like, oh
Definitely.
yeah, I freaking sit in front of my computer too much.
Yeah. And I try everything. My computer is everything in my desk is like very ergonomic, 90-degree angles. I have a standing desk. I'm very conscious
Same,
about
yeah.
that because I get
Yeah.
a lot of spasms if I don't. But it's like the rest of my body, my gut, my heart, you know, everything is like not being utilized. And like, yeah, I go for walks and I don't know how old you are, but I'm like my mid 30s and like I am feeling it, you know, more and more and more as time goes on. So I think the marrying of giving your brain like something else to focus on while also somewhat being active, even if it's like doesn't have to be like a full on sport. I'm not really a big fan of sports, but I think it's like very important. I mean, obviously, like I'm not coming up
Hey,
with
I
rocket science here.
I miss some of those things. Like I used to mountain bike a lot more. And
Nice.
I actually used to play squash, which is kind of a funny, like an odd sport. But my dad was a squash player, so I would play with my brother and my dad, and like, you know, it's like good that you burn a ton of calories in that
For
sport. It's
sure.
like
You're
right
running.
after kickboxing. Yeah, you run like miles sometimes in matches, and like you use your brain a lot, which I think it's when you're talking about problem solving, it's like I feel like mountain biking for me is like I can kind of like get into sort of a zen space with that.
Totally.
Squash was always like almost like a game of chess. You're like positioning the other person and trying to get and then make sure you're in position while simultaneously running around and trying to hit the ball in the right spot. Like that's just like, you know,
Nice.
was always like I kind of want to find. I just wish it wasn't. There's like sort of a quality of elitism that's sort of hard to get out of with that one. It's like
With
just the
squash?
sort of people who play it. Yeah, it comes from
Yeah,
just,
it's like a little
I don't know.
Tennessee kind of vibes.
Like there's a reason it's not in the Olympics, and that's because like all the pros are brats, right? It's like kind of a weird thing. And I mean, I might be wrong, so don't kill me in the comments. But I just that was that was my vibe when I was in high school, and people would talk about it. But yeah, I don't know. I definitely miss that, and it's like that's one of those things that like I think I found balance in a lot of places in terms of making time for, and it's still always a struggle, but like, you know, I try to make time for myself and my partner to spend time and to do like find ways to also like not do work to do things that like are you know interesting to me that aren't work.
Yeah. Like
But,
we're
I
also in like a
definitely
funny
can do
place
it,
where our work is enjoying, right? Like when I
Yeah.
work most of the time, I'm like, oh, this is not really work, right? Our work is play, but your brain, or even not even your brain, like maybe just your like conscious or your soul, you know, is like, I am working, I am doing a project for somebody else, I am doing this to support my family. So I think it's really like shutting that part of your part of your
your brain off. Yeah.
your brain off or your being off is really important. Speaking of that, you know, I would love to hear a take on kind of like, you know, the difference maybe is not the right word, but like the parallels or non-parallels between freelance work and or even working on a project for yourself, like you were doing now with this audio-visual project, and then working for a big company or studio like ArtTech House. You know, how does that feel? And kind of like, do you feel and notice a very big difference inside of yourself when you're in these two spaces?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. and it's interesting because I've been with ArtTech House full time for like 5 years almost, as I said, and before that I had a little bit of experience freelance, but not a whole lot. I was mostly doing kind of like teaching and my own thing, my own projects, and so like I think doing the full time thing, like there's a lot of things that feel like supportive about working in a studio with other team members consistently because you start to know what strength exists in the team and like also you don't have to do everything yourself, which is something I really appreciate is like now having, if like I'm like, oh, I need to do XYZ, I would go to a different team member and because they're specialized at that, right? And so there's a nice thing about not needing to like actually wear all the hats. Like I can just wear a lot of hats, but it's still within a bubble of like kind of the TouchDesigner software world, which I, in some ways I'm like, I might be missing out on some things, but I still work with like hardware and all of that stuff. It's just I don't necessarily do the spatial designs and like the projector studies and like specking of specific hardware, like a lot of things that other people are there to do and there to do on the team, which does mean I think I can go deeper into those projects. I think that like, when I mentioned that we're a small team, it's like I don't do a lot of collaboration in TouchDesigner, which I do kind of crave. So that's one thing, I think right now I'm kind of like shifting to more of a part-time position in the future and going to be angling out more in terms of working on external freelance, and that's something that's mostly because I want to have experience doing projects that ArtTech House doesn't necessarily do, like working with a musician and doing like visuals for a show or something, like stuff that lets me also have a little more control over what kinds of projects I do. But did I freeze?
No, you're good.
I'm
here.
That was my stream coming back. Oh my God. Yeah, I forgot. I'm like, sorry, derailed myself there. But yeah, so that's like, a lot of my, but then, yeah, I've recently, I've done some external things here and there throughout the process. And I think it's interesting because there's a familiarity and like a consistency with working with the same people in the same team where I don't also have to like
learn somebody's.
Yeah, it's about like how people work, right? Like I don't have to relearn that every project. So there's a nice thing like some of the external projects I'm like, oh yeah, like this is also how this person wants to pay me even, right? Is like always a question, like when will that be? How will that be? All of these like how do they communicate? Do they communicate often, or are they hard to get a hold of? Like, is it over email or like random WhatsApp messages? It's like, so just that actually is like exhausting in and of itself, where I'm like, oh yeah, forgot how like, it's nice to just have like a Slack channel, right? Right. That you just have to pay attention to. So there's, I think like interesting pros and cons regarding like the freedom over what you're doing, but then versus like something that's consistent and has a group of other professionals that you're used to working with. So I don't know, it's they're both really valuable, and I think it's like really up to, I don't know, what you want. If you can certainly if you can find the it's not a given that you can find, say, a position at a studio too, so I think that's a valuable thing to have. Yeah, I don't know. Those are like my quick thoughts.
No, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. It's like kind of this, almost like a dichotomy of like pros and cons, like everything in life, right? It's like always like there's always grass is always greener, and perspective is what's that quote? Perspective is the killer of seeing, or something along those lines. Like where you're looking at the thing from is going to change the way you look at it. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a tough one, I think, especially for, quote unquote, creative freedom, free people that are so used to just being like, I'm going to do my daily today, or I'm going to do my audiovisual project today. And then all of a sudden being like, here's your deadline. here is your project. Here is a client that wants this. They don't like this. They're a pain in the ass to work with. They're this and that and this and that. Here's an art director that thinks that they know what they're talking about. They don't know anything. It's like
Yeah.
it's a and it compounds. It compounds. The more responsibility you have, maybe the less hands-on you are. Maybe that's something that you want, but maybe that's something that you don't want. And then maybe you have to deal with personalities. Maybe that's something that is totally. I was talking to I just totally blanked on his name, which is kind of embarrassing. Fucking.
I don't know. I would help if I knew who you were going.
No,
for.
you're gonna laugh when I say his name because it's actually ridiculous that I can't remember his name. Shit.
Was it recent when you
Matthew?
did?
Yeah,
Matthew
Reagan. Matthew Reagan.
Okay, I thought it might. Yeah.
Jesus, embarrassing. Sorry, Matthew. Matthew Reagan, and we were talking about like his when he went from working at Obscura to the Sphere, and how he had to like all of a sudden go from being very hands-on, kind of like inside the projects, to being like completely managing a bunch of people, and and how that is a completely different skill,
a different job. Yeah,
a completely different skill. And I just found that very interesting, especially when it's on such a high level like MSG. You're managing a team of 100 people is nothing like managing, your Slack channel with 5 or 6 people that you're kind of together in. But yeah, I think that he had a good take on it, that it was like something that he really liked to learn and something that he really enjoyed learning, but also through learning it realized that it's not for him, which I appreciate that kind of ethos. It's a very positive. He's such a, it's such a testament to his personality of like positive, and like getting the good things out of life instead of being like, I hated that. It was terrible,
there's so much to learn there, but it might not be for you too. Like that's an important thing to know. Is it for me? Also, what things are, I think that this kind of like comes into, we were talking about school earlier and like getting to explore lots of things. And I sometimes like encounter this perspective of like, I had to take this class. I didn't want to take this class. It wasn't useful to me. Maybe it's like English or sociology or something that's like not related to your, like those required courses that people complain about. And I'm like, well, I don't really understand that, because I think that like everything is kind of connected to like life and can be connected back to what you care about in some way. Like it's like everything, there's like relationships between all of it, right? And so like and that means there's also like value in learning anything. Like you don't have to go super deep, but you and maybe you also say, I want to prioritize other things in my learning. But there's like a connection to be made anywhere. And you can like, I don't know, I have anecdotes on that too. Like chaos theory, right, is just a complete area of study that's born from connecting two areas of science that were disconnected previously, right? So you have like fractals, which existed in mathematics for a long time. People didn't really think they had actual applications beyond being like interesting numbers behaviors, right? And then you had like the sciences that like didn't really like think that certain things could be solved, like weather patterns and other things like that. And then you have like Lorentz and Mandelbrot, who are like, actually we can apply these patterns to these natural phenomena that have self-similar behaviors. And there's actually a lot of resistance at the time to that from those in those fields, because they're like, what are you like?
I never made that distinction. That is that really like Mandelbrot was a big proponent of like chaos theory? They're connected to that in that sense. I never knew that.
Yeah. There's a book that's kind of a layman's like history. It's just called Chaos. It's like James Glick. I haven't read it in a long time, but yeah, it talks about Lorentz and also Mandelbrot and like their importance.
I never knew that they're. I guess now that you're saying it, it makes total sense that those would be connected, right? It's like the structure of like the structure of so many seemingly random things, right? But you can actually quantify it into like an actual structure, which is like what a fractal is.
Yeah.
Right? It's like
when they would study like there's like, coastal branching where you have like different levels and it has similar behaviors. And that's like fractal, right? And it's a thing in nature.
100%.
And so then it's like, well, can you find ways to represent that mathematically or model that? And it turns out that like fractals help doing that, right?
Right.
So
Interesting.
so it's that kind of, and same with the weather, right? There's these kinds of problems where you have a seed and then it evolves from that point, right? And so like the strange attractors and things like that. So anyway, I don't know. It's been a long time since I've like read that book, but
it's
it is
fascinating.
it's a cool one, yeah.
And I actually want to ask you about this, and it's very good segue into it, like emergent patterns in nature, like what are you, definitely like kind of what we are talking about now, but I want to just direct it a little bit more, and take it where you want, but this is kind of like my way of trying to get into a little bit more of a pseudo spiritual esoteric conversation.
Sure.
Please feel free to take it wherever you want, but do you think of the why of these emergent patterns in nature, and where do you draw inspiration from them in?
Yeah, it's like a good question. I think that for me, like, if you wanted to go into the spiritual side of things,
Always.
I think like I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about or like focusing on that aspect for a while. I think like, but from an inspiration perspective, I do think that like studying and watching nature and like observing it and experiencing it, there is sort of like always kind of an unknowable aspect. I do feel that for sure, and that it's inspiring because like you can just look at like I'm someone who like has probably spent time just like looking at trees and being like, that one branches differently than that one. Like that's the kind of or like just being like, oh, look at those leaves, like that's cool. Like the way that there's these like veins that kind of have angles that branch. I mean, that's part of like why I'm like doing this kind of, you can probably see it in some of my art. It's just these kinds of patterns and nuance to the way that they change and things like that, and the organic qualities that I pursue. I love things that are like hyper digital as well, but I think again, it's like there's like an element of like feeling that I think you can convey with things that feel or that appear organic, or that draw from that as like a inspiration. And so it's not only just like the surprise that I was talking about previously, but like I'm drawn towards, like getting at things that have that quality, but still are digital too. I don't, I do things sometimes that veer into realism, but that's not my core aesthetic. Like I like things that feel organic, but are clearly digital. Right. And I think that that's like a cool like space and a space where like you can imbue things that like can kind of create a feeling, which is really, I don't know. I don't think too hard too about like,
the why.
Like, yeah, the why. Well, I do think about the why, but at the end of the day, I also feel like it ends up being a trap sometimes for me. Like I can get stuck in like loops that I've sort of at this point stopped kind of going down those rabbit holes. Like, the philosophical stuff is not my favorite because it just feels so infinite and full of like winding paths that don't necessarily always bear fruit, whereas like I'd rather make something and be like, this felt good to make and I like it and I want to share it and I hope that people like enjoy it. Like I know it's very surface level. A lot of my personal work is like kind of just like aesthetic in a way. I'm not necessarily using it to say things about politics or to say things about the world, though I value work that does that immensely too. But yeah, I think that there's also something to be said for like creating work that feels authentic, and then like hopefully people see something in that and get something out of that. It's similar to why like I think growing up we had I still have actually one of them, a Kandinsky print on my wall, and like I feel like I owe a lot aesthetically to Kandinsky because I like stared at those prints so much as a kid, and then like drew stuff that felt abstract in a similar way, and like that language, like that kind of language that is abstract, but there's something there that's human, right? And
Right.
I can be like moved by that. I think that some people aren't, but it's similar with music too. Like there's something about like making work that is authentic that can be powerful to the viewer, and it's not important about what you're trying to say necessarily, though. That's another aspect of art, I think, is like
Totally.
explicit messages. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, it's no, that's really potent. Kind of before the stream we talked a little bit about how much I liked your music, and one of the things we were saying was that it's interesting how it has the feeling of like I can dance to it, I can move to it, but it's also like making me think. It's cerebral, and I think that that's kind of like where abstract the best is like a weird thing to say about art, but like my favorite abstract art is really that, like where it's like completely seemingly random, completely seemingly generated, maybe even like like fractal art is a good example, because it's like you can look at it, if you zoom into it, it's like all these really weird shit and it's very pretty, but then you might zoom out or you might look at something and see, oh, here I see these things are all the same, and they're all kind of like patternizing outwards. And in abstract art you have that a lot of like something seemingly random has some sort of interconnectedness. Maybe it's like the overarching shape of everything, or the color palette that's being used is pulling your position and your focus into something. And I really appreciate that from things, because it is in a way hard to do. Like obviously we can say that there's a lot of shitty abstract art out there, and like a lot of modern art, and shitty
sure,
again.
there's a lot of shitty art.
My
period,
personal.
though. Right?
No, for sure.
Like I don't know, it's just like I don't think I think it should exist. I think that that's not to be like a don't make art if it's shitty. I think everyone should make art, right?
Totally.
But and also
I mean, in
like
the sense
it's kind of a heavy thing to say too, that it's like I think it's more nuanced than that. But yeah,
It's
I know what
more
you're saying.
nuanced. It's more nuanced. I mean, when I say it like that, I mean like, yeah, totally valid. Like no judgment to shitty art, or what I consider shitty art. It's all subjective. Like
Yeah, pretty much.
my art is definitely shitty to some people for sure. So it's like
yeah.
I mean, like in the sense of like, there are things that are like more simplistic that maybe don't draw me in as much. And somebody's like, oh, I love that circle. You made it so amazing. And I'm like, oh, I don't really think that that's cool. But there's like the point that I'm trying to get to is that there's merit in everything. And it's kind of interesting to see where, where you draw inspiration from, in that sense of like, Kandinsky's an interesting kind of pull. It's interesting that you kind of have that as your aesthetic pull. I wouldn't think that about your art, but that's very interesting. I
just say like his language is so like the way that he, like the sense of composition and balance and like use of abstract elements as like language. It's like you can transmute that however you want, right?
Yeah.
But he does it in a way that's like works so well. And it's so consistent, and he has his own artistic identity that you see a work and you're like that's Kandinsky,
you know it right away.
Right.
And even though it's just like a bunch of shapes and shit. It's like Pollock, right? Like you look at it and you're like, oh, it just splatters on a canvas, and you're like, oh, okay.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so I think that internalizing that, and not just, I mean, there's lots of artists. He's just one example that I looked at a lot because we have those prints on the wall, right? But like, I think there will always be like a place in my heart for, like, if I go and see a Kandinsky, I'll be like, okay, yeah, I can like get it. I can traverse that artwork in the same way that like, it's like I learned to understand abstraction through moving through those artworks as a kid, And when I say that, I think of like this idea that, is this notion that like a painting could be a time-based medium in a way, in the way that you experience it, because you don't look at it entirely at the same time, right? So there's also that too, of the experience of like, exploring a world. So I think of that like learning kind of that way of, and naturally too, like I didn't put words to that until maybe like after school or in school, like the idea that idea. But I think, finding my way of understanding artwork, that was part of it for sure. Lots of other things were part of it, of course, music, film, games, everything, like all of it. But yeah, that's it. I think the still image is like one of those things that can be hard for people to, especially the abstract one, like something that's abstract art. I feel like it can be a barrier, and I've taught art classes where people were just like, I don't like understand abstract art, and I'm like, you're in art school, but okay, like let's, it's cool. Like, you know, but it's just interesting to me. I don't know. Yeah.
What where have you taught like art? And have you taught, because you obviously are a very good teacher, you know, from your tutorials and kind of like the way you express things, but yeah, have you been teaching like university, or are you teaching in, like, where are you
Right
teaching?
now I'm not. Now
Okay.
I'm not teaching, but that
Okay,
was
okay.
like post like between getting my master's and like really being full-time touch designer. I definitely was doing some adjuncting, just like figuring out kind of
Oh,
what I was
nice.
doing. And so but again, like I mentioned, it wasn't necessarily in things that were like exactly what I'd want to be teaching. Like I haven't
Okay.
taught, like I know like Matthew Reagan had all of these like touch designer modules that he taught
Right.
at university
Yeah.
and level, and like I would have loved to do that. No one really wanted it that I talked to. You know, it's like those programs didn't exist and still really don't in my area. And uh, you know, so I think what I fell into, because I came out of the university system, so people knew who I was, and so someone was like, "Hey, can you know, microcontrollers? Can you teach like a DIY prototyping class in the Center for Entrepreneurship?"
Oh,
That's
that's
part
awesome.
of like, so I did that as part of like a larger class about entrepreneurial design, and the main lecture was not led by me, but was about like systems thinking, and it was actually pretty
Hmm.
interesting. And not to dive
Do
too into it, but
you do you enjoy teaching? Like, do you get, I mean, do you have like the itch for
oh,
it? Like, is it
I
something that you
do. I wouldn't say. I think that the lack of itch for it is just realizing like I like doing it, but I think that I'd rather be doing it in a way that's like I think creating tutorials and kind of pursuing even like more educational tools online makes more sense for me where I'm located and the kind of fiscal models that exist for it, and the like there's a lot of things about teaching as an adjunct or even just teaching in general that are challenging, I think, as
mm-hmm,
a career.
mm-hmm.
And there's hoops that I don't really, in politics there. There's politics and hoops everywhere, but the ones specifically in like academic institutions at the collegiate level are just like,
Especially
nah.
today,
Like,
especially
yeah,
nowadays.
it's only gotten worse since I was there,
Oh yeah.
or more challenging. And so, yeah, it's something I think is really important, and I think, you know, doing things like workshops or things that are really specific to like people in the area who do touch designer feel like better uses of my
Fit.
energy and better fits.
Mm-hmm.
But I do appreciate it. I do like doing it. I think it's a lot of work, and it's not valued high enough
No, for sure.
for what it is. That's
For sure.
yeah, compensated or otherwise. So
Um, okay, kind of moving on a little bit, but staying in kind of the same universe, I guess. You mentioned bi-directional feedback, kind of in your
mm,
systems and kind of the way that you almost learn or kind of create. Can you dive a little bit more deeper into that and what it means to you? Um,
yeah, yeah.
and I know we keep on coming to generative art again, but I think that it's very apropos to kind of this way of thinking.
Yeah, yeah, because I think before I mentioned it, it was about like the process of learning something like TouchDesigner.
Yes.
And when I think about my own trajectory through any sort of, I think this is really could be applied to like learning any sort of anything really.
Mm-hmm.
I think about it similarly with like music, with tools that I'm learning. You
Mm-hmm.
have the end result, right? And you see, like, let's say you hear a piece of music and you're like, there's that melody line, but you don't know the notes, right? You're not like, I can't actually play it. And then you could learn music, like you could learn sheet music, and then you start to connect, you know, the physical act of playing it, the key on the keyboard, because I'm a keyboardist, so I'm thinking in those terms, but like, you know, the process of playing it, I'm actually a horrible reader. I've never learned to read music really. I can read it slowly and I can write it.
Ah,
and
you're
I
like
can
more of a
memorize
you have a
it.
good ear.
I have like a good ear, yeah, and I'm whatever. That's what it is. I'm not, but I think there's a. I will talk to pianists who are like, I wish I wasn't so reliant on it. I've had those conversations
Right.
recently, but
The grass is always greener.
yeah. No, I do miss being able, like, I can't sit down and play like Ravel or Bach anymore. I'm just like, I have to. Okay, bummer. But yeah, the sort of that like bidirectional thing, it can exist at a certain point where you're like, I hear that melody, and I can play it back, right? Because I've built that pathway, right? I know that when I play this structure, it results in that output, and you can get to a point where that's intuitive and you don't have to think about it, which is like a thing that can happen if you're playing improvised music. Now with something like TouchDesigner, it might be like, it's not in the same kind of time scale, like it's not real necessarily, even it's real time but in a different way, right? So but the process of saying like, okay, I don't know how to make this output, so like how do I do it, right? Is like I have something in my mind, but how do I create that? And that I think is like a big barrier when you start, because you might have a lot of ideas and not know how to realize them. And I think it takes a lot of building bridges forward. So saying like, okay, I'm going to follow this tutorial, and as I go, I'm going to think really hard about why I'm doing everything I'm doing. Like they might explain it well, they might not. If I don't understand anything, figure out like what is going on, right? Really investigate the whole structure so that I can reuse bits of that in the future. And really understand the function of the components. You also can just do it, right? You can also just, that's just one way, but like starting to have building blocks where you're like, yeah, if I feed something into it, this is the outcome. And then chunking that, right? So you start to have, I think this is like, I don't know, even just part of aging is you start chunking even memories into bigger.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Oh,
This is larger picture, and so all of that I think is to say like eventually you can find a point where you see something.
I'm
Can recreate in my head the steps that I would take to get there, and maybe there's gaps that need to
Simon,
be filled
sorry.
and problems that need to be
getting
solved.
a little bit of weirdness here. Do you want to just kill your screen share just so we can I don't know if it's my bandwidth or yours, but something
I did kill
did
my
already?
screen share, but let me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it still struggling?
No, it's okay now. It's kind of like just pausing and then continuing. But I'm
Oh, okay. Did you miss anything I was saying audio
a
wise?
little bit. If you
All
could
good.
just jump back a tad.
Yeah. Do you remember where I when?
You were saying about how we get older and aging and chunking memories.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, I think of like chunking, like you start to hold bigger ideas and memories and structures in your head, right? I think it's like as a kid you might like have a lot of little short, small ideas, and then eventually you can hold like larger abstractions in your mind. That was sort of a side thought, but I think as far as like the idea of eventually, you have enough of these little ways of coming from nothing to an outcome, these like different structures that can have inputs and outputs with TouchDesigner, for instance, that you see something that you haven't made before that maybe someone else made. Maybe it's not even in TouchDesigner, or it's an idea that you have in your head. You're like, I want to make this kind of interactive thing. Then you can actually like envision a path to that, right? Backwards or forwards. You have, there might be places where you're like, I know that this is going to be a problem I have to solve. I don't know how to do this part of it, but you can start like imagining the structure and thinking in terms of that software, I think is what it comes down to. And so for me, that like manifested, and maybe there's other, like, I think that this is just a way of learning, right? I'm probably just describing how I think about it, but because there's so many ways of learning, but like the idea that like, okay, I've done enough tinkering in the software, and I've done enough, like I've built up a large enough kind of repository of techniques that I can think about those abstractly. Like I don't necessarily have to be even at my computer. I could be sketching or even just thinking about it mentally to solve problems. So yeah, and that's the bidirectional thing, right? Where you can start to see something and then recreate it from the other, work backwards from an end result. But I always feel like that comes later. It's really hard to do that from the beginning. You need to build up your components, your tools,
For sure.
your
I mean, it's like learning
methodology.
anything. You can't you can't swim before you or you can't run before you walk. You know, kind of thing. You can, but you're gonna fall, probably hurt yourself. You know, it's actually funny. Like watching.
You can only run and can't walk. That'd be such an interesting.
That'd be so funny.
Interesting.
It's kind of funny when I watch my kid, like, you know, as he's starting to, because walking, obviously, you know, comes fast, not fast, relatively comes fast, but like the running aspect is like you kind of think, oh yeah, the moment you start walking, like just do it faster, but like there's no concept of that. You know what I mean? It's like even if I like kind of pull him along and like, hey, okay, let's go walk faster. There's no like, what does that mean? You know, like it's like yeah, it's just interesting to see that. Okay,
Nice.
cool. I mean, we're kind of reaching the end here. This has been such a great conversation with you. I really appreciate it. I have one last kind of point here that I wanted to ask you about, and it's something actually we didn't really talk about at all, which I find interesting. I guess maybe a little bit, but not really enough. And I'm gonna chunk two things in here into one. But one is kind of glitch art and kind of the aesthetics of failure. Like, what does that mean? Like finding something beautiful from something breaking. And then also kind of like, they're not really connected, but maybe you can connect them in a nice way. Interactive art and kind of how, how the interaction between things is a very different form of expression than like, you know, a video representation of something. Yeah, just give us your 2 cents on that or your 20 cents on that. And we can talk about it.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like because that's I still think I probably cite that in my like inspirations, right? Is the glitch art. And I think it partly comes from like a lot of places. Like I really liked glitch art. I still do, but I think there's a phase where I was like really into it and thinking about it as like the philosophy of it, almost in that like certain types of glitch art, it's the art is almost like the breaking of communication in some ways. Like that's and that's a failure, but it creates an output that is nonetheless potentially worthwhile. And I think about that as like in noise art too, because I've always been like, you know, into the sort of like Aphex Twin, Roger Akita, like clicks and cuts, I met
noise
like
music, you mean?
Yeah, like artists that really like, you know,
there's a whole genre called noise, right? There's a whole genre, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of industrial noise. It's all there, right? Like industrial music, like musique concrète is like OGs, like just being like, we don't consider this music, but we're just going to like take this recording and make sound collages, like all of that. Sound art. It's I really love that vein of music, and there's like this idea of like, we're taking digital artifacts and chopping them up and embracing them as the aesthetic and like finding the, and I think that there's something related to like nature there too, though. Like it's like finding the beauty in nature can sometimes be finding the beauty in like an animal eating another one, right? Because that happens in nature, and like you know, and thinking about the whole process of life as being beautiful, which includes death. And like celebrating that, right? The idea of like not necessarily like mourning, but also celebrating someone's life when they die as well. It's like as much something to you want. It's a sad thing, but it also can be like a moment to be grateful for that person's life and happy for their life, right? 100%. And so again, it's kind of jumping into the spiritual area. So there's your, you know, but anyway, the you know, glitch art to me is like just another embodiment of that. And I think also I think it cuts against in a way like the sort of corporatization, like ultra polish sort of thing. Like I think with like with games, for instance, like is something I'm maybe a hobby of mine is just like in that sort of space. And I really love like the kinds of expression that you can get in like a lo-fi game that's not trying to be the next big like AAA game that pushes your, not that I'm like not interested in checking out the new Indiana Jones like reviewed pretty well, right? It's like my like normal
GTA
computer is still
6
min spec.
is what's going on right now.
Oh yeah. Is that, I'm not even caring about that.
Oh, you got
honestly,
the trailer just looks absolutely bonkers. Like,
yeah, I love a good like a game where it's like, wow, there's some cool stuff going on with the graphics, right? Like it looks really polished and realistic or whatever. Nice, like cyberpunk, all that, whatever, cool.
Oh yeah.
But I'm also like, love a good like weird lo-fi thing.
Art.
Yeah. So there's a lot of those that like, whether it's something that's pixel art or like really just like intentionally mangled or lo-fi, like can create some of my like favorite experiences in games. Like sometimes, very often actually, like the stuff that they've poured lots of money into is so polished and so for everybody that it doesn't speak to me as much. Not that I don't enjoy them, but it and I think that there's value in both for sure. And a lot of talent in both, but there's definitely something to be said for like those just like really weirdo games that just like are just like so weird. I don't know, like in what's his name, like Crepe or Incarp. He's like Steven Sausage Roll and that whole stuff, but he did he has a whole slew of like free weird game experiments, like Slave of God and like all these really weird browser games that are just like trippy, low poly. Yeah, I wish that I knew how to say his name. Yeah. Oh my God. But anyway, yeah, like that sort of ties into it for me. Stephen Lavelle, I think is who I'm talking about. Yeah.
I'll check it out.
In Crepair is the developer name. But yeah, he's super, like he has like a super prolific backlog. It's all this like weird lo-fi. It's just like some really crazy weird, like some of it's so like, I'm like, some of it I don't understand, but there's so much of it that it can be really enjoyable to like pour through it. And so anyway, that's like the glitch art is in some ways also just like pushing against conformity in a way and celebrating like the weirdness.
Nice.
That, yeah. The imperfections.
Have you ever thought about getting into game development if you're being such a big fan
I
of
think
it?
about it too much probably. I'm just like
you're not far from it.
Also,
you're not far from it.
No, I'm not. I'm not. I pay attention to the industry, and lately it's been like kind of rough sounding. So I need to like dig into the engines really, because I also really have been just deep in TouchDesigner, and so the first step for me is like, dig into Unreal a bit, which is not
totally
hard. Like I've done it before, but
you'd love it. It's great.
Yeah,
Unreal's awesome.
No, there's something. It's a different scale of project. I think like to actually ship a game is a huge deal, and
totally.
So yeah, I might dabble in and actually I'm doing like some TouchDesigner game kind of related stuff lately. Like so it's fun that you can do it with Touch, but yeah, it's. But it may be in the future for sure.
Cool.
Really depends. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you heard it here first. When PolyHop opens up his game studio, we announced it on the Visual Cast. I'm just joking.
No, the idea of interactive art I think is important though to touch on, because I do it a lot, and it's interesting because it's not really something I share as publicly. Though I'm hoping to have more features on my Instagram of like, here's my interactive art, because I do it a lot, especially with ArtTech House. And there's something I think that's really, we were talking about like art that's relatively static, like a painting, and how it can be a little hard to like get into it and to find yourself in it. And I think that something about interactive art, when it's really successful for me, is when it can get an individual who's viewing it to sort of like almost forget that they're in like public or in a space, like kind of get people to do things that they wouldn't normally be doing in like move their body in ways, like kind of play with something. Like the idea of playing is important to me. Totally. So I think my favorite pieces are ones where when you watch people, it makes them like move around. It makes them kind of like inquire and poke and like try to figure out what's happening. It can be really hard. I think like you want to make it super easy to get to do something with it, right? A low barrier to entry is what I would say. And then like as high of a ceiling as you have like the time and the budget to do. Like, cause I think like if you can really add depth and things that if someone keeps playing with it and keeps engaging with it, it rewards them. Then I think that's also really successful. Like maybe there's Easter eggs, maybe there's like, and maybe the control is like, yeah, you can do something easily, but like to do something precise actually takes a little bit of time. And I think dialing that in with an interactive piece is harder because you lose someone quick. Like if someone doesn't click with it, they might walk away. And
Right.
you also might not have a long time even if they do stay. Like maybe someone gets really into it and they stay for like 10 to 15 minutes, but then they're like, oh, there's more stuff here. That's like the best case scenario. That's like kind of extreme. It feels like most people, it's like, okay, I spent like 5 or less minutes with this and I kind of got what it does. Cause it's like hard to also make them that deep. Right.
Right.
So, there's all sorts of things you can do to do that. But it's just something I think about is like, how can you make things with depth that also you can enter at like a very surface level, but then find things in it through further exploration.
I love the Easter eggs idea. That should be like
it's
interactive thing. Is like if you do the right thing, then something happens. I love that.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, kind of like interactive pieces having some sort of meaning besides just being pretty, adds to that as well. Of like, am I learning something? Am I getting information? Am I creating something? Right? Like, Lake Heckman had a really nice anecdote on that of like his interactive pieces are like a way for people that wouldn't necessarily make art to make art, right? And that kind of like
it's like a tool as much as it is as a piece.
100%. And then giving the user the ability to leave with something, whether it's maybe an image of their piece or not just like data aggregation of like what's their email address, but like which is also important. But like being able to but being able to have something at the end, an experience that's like tangible, even if it's digitally tangible, just something to memorize, to remember with.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to touch on that because I'm like, yeah, you're right.
No, please, I appreciate that. Thank you for helping me host. I appreciate that.
Oh, for sure.
Again, Simon, super nice having you on, and thank you for your time. This was great. I have when I get to 52 episodes, when I get to a year, I'm gonna have people that I had on again. And you're definitely going to be one of them because there's a lot of things here that I didn't get to touch.
There's
do it.
Plenty to talk about for sure.
Sure.
I'm one of those people who likes talking, for better or worse. So
no, you're good at it. So it was really enjoyable.
Well, okay, flattering.
Anything you would like to plug or say before we leave?
Oh, I'm too hungry to think about anything. Honestly, it's like a nice marathon. No, my stomach is hitting me hard right now. It's physiological stuff. No,
right.
I don't think I have plugs, but I mean, I shared some of my work earlier, and I'm sure there'll be some links and stuff. So my work's on Instagram.
All right,
mostly.
Well, thanks again. Wow, what an episode. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to Manda Smash for the intro and outro music. Thank you to Sophie Holder for the amazing internship helping us with all the episodes. And thank you to the guests for coming on and spending time with us. See you next week.